Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that glows softly at the edge of 2 centuries. A place where the hum of early electricity mixes with the whisper of candle flame, and every shadow seems older than it should be. You're standing at the heart of Edwardian England, just as dusk folds over the cobblestones, and the first lamps begin to bloom against the gathering dark. The air smells faintly of coal smoke, wet stone, and roasting chestnuts. Somewhere down the street, a brass band is warming up, notes drifting like moths toward the halo of a gaslight. You probably won't survive this night, at least, not without losing your sense of time. Because in this moment, as you blink against the flickering amber glow, you're standing halfway between the future and the past. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere far away, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories reach across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the soft drizzle of an Edwardian evening. It's around 1905. Gas lamps stand in neat rows, their mantles flickering like captured stars. Shop windows gleam with polished brass, and somewhere in the air hangs the faint, oily smell of lamp fuel. But what draws your eye isn't the new, it's the old. A cluster of paper lanterns, strung across a town square in a perfect, uneven constellation. Each one glows with a warm, pulsing light, as though holding the heartbeat of a bygone century. The sign above the crowd reads "The Festival of St. Edmund Revived." You pause. It's an Edwardian invention, but it's built on something far older. St. Edmund, the martyred king of East Anglia, a hero of the 9th century, once had medieval fairs held in his honor. In this modern revival, though, there's electricity humming in the background, a brass band playing where once there been pipe and drum. It's both memory and invention, nostalgia dressed in starched linen. You push gently through the crowd. Women in wide skirts and feathered hats pass by holding painted paper lanterns. Children chase one another with wax candles tucked into tin holders. There's laughter, a dog barking, a faint whistle of a steam train in the distance. Somewhere, a vendor is selling sugared almonds wrapped in tissue paper, just as medieval fair hawkers sold honeyed nuts centuries earlier. A voice beside you murmurs, "Funny, isn't it? We think we're so modern." You turn, but the speaker's already gone, just a shimmer of lamplight and mist. It's true, though. Edwardian England is perched delicately between worlds, motor cars and medieval daydreams, wireless telegraphs and maypole ribbons. Historians still argue whether this fascination with the past was genuine love or just fashionable escapism. A comfortable dream for an empire beginning to tremble under its own weight. But tonight, the only weight you feel is the lantern in your hand, its frame of thin bamboo, its paper printed with tiny fleur-de-lis. You lift it slightly, and its glow brushes your chin, soft and amber. You imagine peasants centuries ago carrying rushlights down muddy lanes to some forgotten fair. The tools have changed, but the gesture, the holding of light against darkness, remains the same. You pass under an archway woven with ivy. There the street opens into a small square. A banner flutters overhead, "Pageant of the Past, entry 2d." The square is lined with wooden stalls, each painted with mock medieval signs. "Ye Olde Candle Maker," herbal remedies for all manner of ailment. Fortunes read by candle in hand. You can't help but grin. It's kitschy, charming, and absolutely Edwardian. A young man in a velvet jerkin calls out, "Step right up. See the knights of old reborn." He gestures toward a small stage where a handful of amateur actors are clanking around in aluminum armor. One lifts his visor to sip tea from a china cup. Another adjusts his mustache under a chain coif. The crowd chuckles, A polite Edwardian laughter, the kind that says, "We're in on the joke, but isn't it delightful?" The mainstream historical fact here. Around this time, England really did experience a revival of medieval pageantry. Towns like York, Chester, and Winchester resurrected medieval-style festivals to celebrate local heritage. Entire communities rehearsed historical parades for months, dressing as peasants, nobles, saints, and kings. The Edwardians weren't just nostalgic. They were method actors in a grand national memory play. You stroll further into the fair. The cobblestones underfoot glisten with rain. Someone selling lanterns shaped like miniature cathedrals. Their thin-colored panes glow red and blue like stained glass. You overhear a vendor explaining that his lanterns are inspired by those carried in medieval Corpus Christi processions. He's mostly right. In the Middle Ages, villagers indeed paraded through towns on holy days carrying candles, torches, or small lanterns, symbols of divine light overcoming sin. A quirky tidbit: the lanterns of those processions were sometimes made from hollowed turnips before paper became common. Yes, the same humble turnip that later inspired the Halloween pumpkin. You imagine a peasant carving a grinning face into a root vegetable, placing a stub of candle inside, and setting it on a church step. And suddenly, the distance between 1305 and 1905 doesn't seem so wide. A bell rings from somewhere, not the deep toll of a church bell, but the crisp ring of a brass handbell. A group of children passes by, each wearing a paper crown and carrying a banner. The words read, "Light in the darkness." You realize this isn't just play acting, it's yearning. The Edwardians, living in an age of invention, still feared what all ages have feared: the dark. The festivals, the lights, the pageants were, in their own genteel way, charms against the void. You stop near a bonfire at the edge of the square. It's modest, a controlled municipal blaze, but mesmerizing. Sparks drift upward, catching in the damp air like golden dust. An elderly man beside you leans on his cane. "When I was a boy," he says softly, "they said St. Edmund's lantern never went out, not even in the wind." He looks at you, eyes pale and reflective. Maybe it still burns somewhere. You don't answer. You just watch as the flames crackle, their light painting warm halos on the faces nearby. You can feel the mix of old and new medieval myth wrapped in Edwardian sensibility, the sacred softened into sentiment. The man sighs. "They say the monks carried the saints' bones across the fens by lantern light," he continues. "Historians still argue whether they ever reached Bury St. Edmunds at all." He chuckles. "But perhaps that's not the point." You nod. The point, you think, is that the story keeps glowing. A soft drizzle begins again, and people lift their umbrellas, lace canvas, some with the new steel frames that fold cleverly into walking sticks. The lights shimmer through the rain. The fair is still going strong. A puppet show here, a brass waltz there, and lanterns swaying like captive stars. Somewhere, a young woman is reading poetry aloud, her voice half drowned by the crowd. Something about memory and light and forgetting. You wander past a stall selling illuminated postcards. They shimmer faintly, images printed with metallic ink that catches the lamplight. One shows a knight kneeling before a lady in a garden of roses. Another shows a medieval fair, almost identical to the one around you. You buy one for a penny and slip it into your coat pocket. Later, it'll feel like proof that the night was real. You pass through a narrow alley behind the main square where the noise fades. The glow softens. A single lantern hangs from a hook, its paper torn slightly by the damp air. You stop beneath it, listening. The distant hum of a tram mixes with the faint chime of church bells. Somewhere unseen, a clock strikes 9. You realize you've been walking for hours, though it feels timeless. The alley opens into a smaller courtyard where a group of older women are quietly lighting candles around a stone cross. Their movements are deliberate, reverent. You hesitate at the edge, not wanting to intrude, but one of them looks up and smiles. "Come," she says, her voice low. "It's the vigil of the lanterns." You step closer. The candles flicker in the breeze, their flames trembling but never extinguishing. The women hum a tune, something ancient, modal, almost Gregorian. The melody loops like a gentle spiral, drawing you inward. You realize that what you're hearing might be centuries old, passed down not through books but through memory and repetition. The sound is soft, yet it fills the courtyard like mist. One woman tells you that this small vigil has been held every year since long before Victoria was born. She says it honors the souls who carry light into the dark. You don't know if she means saints, ancestors, or something else entirely. But the way she says it, quietly, matter-of-factly, makes it feel true. You stay there a long time, watching the candles burn down, the wax pooling like tiny lakes. Around you, the town hums laughter, wheels, footsteps, but here, in this little pocket of stillness, time folds in on itself. You could be in 1905 or 1405 or somewhere beyond both. Eventually, you turn to leave. The woman nods, still humming, and one of the candles flares briefly as though in farewell. You step back into the alley, then into the square again, where the bonfire has burned low and the lanterns sway gently in the cooling breeze. The faces you pass are soft in content, illuminated from within by that same quiet glow. As you walk home through the gaslit streets, you glance back once more at the square. It looks almost unreal now, a pocket of golden light adrift in fog. For a moment, you imagine that if you kept walking backward, the cobblestones might change beneath your feet, the lamps turn to torches, the brass band to a choir of monks. And maybe in some strange way they do. The rain has passed by morning, leaving the Edwardian town rinsed clean, the cobblestones shining like pewter under the pale spring sun. You wake to the sound of laughter drifting through an open window, the chiming of church bells carried on a cool breeze, and a faint rhythm that could only mean one thing: a drum. A soft, steady beat, like a heart beneath lace. You lean out the window and see ribbons everywhere looped between lampposts, woven through railings, tied to door handles. Red, green, yellow, and blue. The air smells faintly of lilac and something sweet, maybe honey, maybe cider. You blink, and for a heartbeat, you could almost swear you're seeing a medieval village preparing for a festival. It's May Day, the 1st of May, and the Edwardians are out to reclaim an ancient ritual, the dance of the May Queen. You dress quickly, curiosity pulling you downstairs. The streets are alive. Children run barefoot with flower crowns tangled in their hair, ribbons trailing like comets behind them. A cart rumbles past filled with blossoms, a handwritten sign reading, for the garland ceremony, Parish Green. You follow the trail of petals through the square where you'd seen the lanterns the night before. Only now the space has transformed. The bonfire's ashes have been swept aside, replaced by a towering pole wrapped in colored streamers. Around it, villagers gather in white dresses and straw hats, their shoes damp from the morning dew. Somewhere a gramophone hums out a waltz, but you can tell this isn't just pageantry, it's devotion. You edge closer to a woman arranging a garland of hawthorn and roses. She glances up, smiling, cheeks flushed. "It's older than any of us," she says, handing you a sprig of wildflower. "Even before Christ, they say, but we keep it for the joy." The mainstream historical fact here is simple. By the Edwardian period, May Day festivals had made a full comeback after being banned for centuries under the Puritans and later discouraged during the Industrial Rush. Towns from Oxfordshire to Devon resurrected medieval-style celebrations, complete with maypoles, mummers, and flower processions. For the Edwardians, who lived in the age of motor cars and telegrams, the revival was more than quaint nostalgia. It was a kind of rebellion against modern life's noise and pace. The drumbeat grows louder. A small parade approaches, led by children in white tunics scattering petals. Behind them, a girl of about 16 walks slowly beneath a canopy of flowers. Her hair gleams gold in the sunlight. Her crown of daisies trembles as she steps. The crowd hushes. "The May Queen," someone whispers reverently. You've seen queens before on coins, in portraits, but never like this. She looks less like royalty and more like a spirit of spring, a bridge between worlds. She carries a garland almost too large for her, woven with lilies, ivy, and bright bluebells. When she passes, people bow slightly, not out of duty, but out of instinct. The band begins to play, and you can't help but tap your foot. The melody is old. A reworked version of Sumer is Ikumen in, a medieval English round celebrating the coming of summer. Historians still argue whether the Edwardians revived these songs from genuine manuscripts or simply composed new ones to sound medieval. But to your ear, it doesn't matter. The rhythm feels older than reason. The May Queen reaches the base of the pole, where the dancers wait, young men and women holding ribbons like reins. The music swells. They circle the pole, weaving over and under in intricate patterns, their laughter spilling through the square like sunlight on water. Someone hands you a small cup of cider. It's sharp, cold, and a little too strong for morning. You take a sip anyway. Around you, vendors sell sugared buns, tiny flags, and paper flowers. The entire town seems determined to bloom. You think about the Middle Ages, about how May Day was once a time of dangerous joy, when villagers crowned a maiden as Flora, goddess of flowers, and danced from dusk till dawn. Those medieval celebrations had a wildness to them, fertility rites disguised as holy processions. The Edwardians, of course, tidy it up, turning pagan ecstasy into polite spectacle. But you sense the same pulse underneath, just quieter now, humming beneath lace gloves and polite applause. "Do you see her dress?" whispers an older woman beside you. "It's stitched with forget-me-nots. My mother said the medieval May Queens wore herbs to keep spirits away." You look again. The hem of the May Queen's gown is indeed scattered with small blue flowers, each one hand-sewn. You smile. A quirky tidbit. Edwardian seamstresses sometimes hid charms in ceremonial garments, tiny bells, sprigs of rosemary, even a folded prayer stitched into the lining, echoes of medieval superstitions that never quite died. The queen begins her slow circuit of the green, followed by her attendants. At one corner, a group of children perform a hobby horse dance, waving ribbons and pretending to chase away winter spirits. The audience laughs and claps, but you can see the echo of something much older, a ritual of renewal disguised as play. An elderly man, his top hat askew, leans toward you. "They say the May Queen's garland used to hang in the church till it dried," he mutters. "For luck, you know, until the next year's bloom." He chuckles. Historians still argue whether that custom began with Flora or the Virgin Mary, but who's counting? The queen reaches the churchyard gate. There she stops, raises her garland, and hands it to the vicar, who accepts it solemnly. The garland will rest by the altar, a symbol of life renewed. The crowd applauds, a few people wiping away tears they'll later pretend were from the sun. Then laughter. Someone tripped over a ribbon. The band restarts off-key. A little boy lets go of his balloon and watches it vanish into the blue. The spell breaks, but softly. You feel it too, that delicate balance between reverence and ridiculousness that defines so much of Edwardian ritual. You stroll toward a nearby tent where tea is being served. Inside, women pour from porcelain pots, their lace cuffs pristine despite the bustle. "You must try the May cake," says one, offering you a slice studded with currants. It tastes of nutmeg and memory. As you eat, You overhear snatches of conversation. Bringing back the Morris men next year. The mayor wants electric lights for the evening dance. My cousin says the queen of last year married her crown bearer. You smile into your cup. Beneath the small talk, you can sense something deeper, the yearning for connection, for meaning wrapped in ribbon and song. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The crowd has thinned. The May Queen now sits beneath a canopy of roses, smiling shyly as people approach to curtsy or offer flowers. You catch the faint rustle of silk and laughter as a breeze flutters the ribbons above her. A boy offers to sell you a sprig of hawthorn for luck. You buy it, tucking it behind your ear. Another historical whisper. Hawthorn was once believed to guard against witches and illness, a medieval superstition the Edwardians kept as a charming quirk. You grin. Who couldn't use a little protection these days? The gramophone starts again, a waltz this time, and couples begin to dance, careful not to crush the petals beneath their feet. The May Queen watches, hands folded in her lap, sunlight painting gold across her gown. There's something serene about her stillness amid the motion, like an anchor in a tide of laughter. As the afternoon wears on, the cider grows stronger, the dancing looser, and the music more joyful. A man dressed as Robin Hood steals a pastry from a table and bows theatrically as the crowd cheers. A pair of girls in corseted gowns attempt a medieval round dance, collapsing into giggles halfway through. You find yourself clapping along, laughing too. At some point, a small brass band begins to play Greensleeves. The melody drifts upward into the branches, ancient and familiar. For a fleeting moment, you forget what century you're in. The scene could belong to any era, laughter, sunlight, and the stubborn persistence of joy. As dusk falls, lanterns begin to appear again, hung between trees and rooftops. Their glow mirrors the petals scattered on the ground. You linger by the maypole, watching its ribbons flutter in the breeze. A faint mist gathers, softening the outlines of people and buildings. The May Queen rises one last time. Her garland is gone now, left in the church, but her smile remains luminous. She walks slowly through the crowd, touching a shoulder here, a hand there, murmuring thanks. When she passes you, she pauses briefly, perhaps to adjust her crown, perhaps to look. You're not sure, but for a second her eyes catch the lantern light and you feel something ancient flicker there, a spark that's traveled across centuries, refusing to dim. You wake to a gray Edwardian dawn that seems carved from frost. The air tastes faintly of coal smoke and candle wax, and somewhere a church bell shivers through the mist. Your fingers ache as you tug your coat tighter, thin wool that's doing its best against a February morning. Candlemas, the 2nd of February, has arrived. To the Edwardians, it was the heart of winter's endurance, but beneath their Edwardian manners lies a medieval soul, still clutching a stub of wax for luck. Hey guys, well, tonight we're not exactly starting in warmth, but in the kind of cold that makes you question your life choices. You can practically feel your breath trying to freeze mid-sentence. Still, there's something oddly comforting about this. You're tracing a thread of human hope that runs from monks in stone cloisters to lamplit Edwardian parlors. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the cobbled streets toward the church, where people shuffle inside for the Candlemas blessing. The flickering gold from the doorway spills over the worn stones, lighting puddles that reflect faces, rosy, sleepy, and expectant. Inside, you catch that mingled smell of damp wool, tallow, and incense. Candles crowd every ledge and sill, small defiant flames against the gloom. The vicar stands in the chancel, voice echoing as he blesses the year's new stock of candles. In medieval times, this was serious business. Light was life. Candles meant safety from darkness, hope through Lent, and a promise that spring would, eventually, crawl back over the frozen earth. Edwardians, ever fond of revivals, brought the tradition back, part faith, part theater. Historians still argue whether Candlemas was originally a Christian appropriation of an older Roman rite, the festival of lights dedicated to Juno, or a more pagan, hearth-based ritual marking the midpoint between solstice and equinox. Either way, you can almost feel the overlap, a sacred layering of belief like candle wax poured again and again over the same wick. A woman beside you presses a thin candle into your hand. "For blessings," she whispers, her accent broad and warm. You realize how odd it feels to hold something so fragile that somehow carried meaning for nearly 1,000 years. You imagine a medieval peasant doing the same, clutching a beeswax taper against a February wind, praying the flock survives the rest of winter. Now here you are, your fingertips sticky with wax, silently joining the same unbroken chain of hope. After the service, the congregation drifts out into the cold. The town seems lighter, as if all those tiny flames left a residue of gold on the air. You follow a group of children carrying their blessed candles home, their laughter turning into smoky ghosts in the chill. At a corner, a boy trips, candle plunging into the slush. He grins, rescues it, wipes it off with his sleeve, and lights it again from a friend's flame. You can't help smiling. Some metaphors are too obvious even for historians to ruin. As the day stretches, the town's festivities shift from pious to playful. A market springs up near the square, stalls adorned with garlands of winter greenery, vendors hawking sweet buns dusted with sugar and spice. The air grows alive with chatter and the occasional bray of a stubborn pony. Somewhere, a band starts up, flute, fiddle, and the steady thump of a drum. The melody sounds old enough to have been hummed by pilgrims. Edwardians adored this sort of medieval pastiche. Reenactment societies and arts and crafts idealists worked hand in glove to make history pretty again. One local gentleman, a known enthusiast of the Gothic revival, has even arranged a procession where townsfolk dress as monks and maidens. You watch as they shuffle by, earnest but endearing, chanting in vaguely Latin tones that not even the vicar can quite decipher. You follow them uphill to an old manor house hosting its own Candlemas feast. Inside, the drawing room is transformed into a medieval banqueting hall, or at least what Edwardians thought that looked like. Tapestries borrowed from the family's collection hang crookedly on the walls. Candles crowd every surface, their flames throwing amber halos across the faces of guests. You pass platters of roast meat, steaming bowls of stew, and golden loaves scored with crosses for luck. There's laughter and music, but under it all a kind of wistfulness, Edwardians clinging to ritual in an age of progress. Electric lights hum faintly in the corridors beyond, switched off for the evening to preserve the atmosphere. You half expect to see a medieval minstrel, but instead a young man with a mustache strums a guitar and sings a folk ballad from Sussex. Progress and nostalgia coexist like uneasy dinner companions. At the far end of the hall, a woman recites a poem, something half Victorian, half monastic, about faith and frost. People listen, transfixed. Her voice trembles in the candlelight. You can't tell if it's emotion or the cold. The moment feels suspended between centuries. Later, when the feast winds down, the hostess insists on one last superstition. Before extinguishing the candles, each guest must whisper a wish for the coming year. It's a quaint custom, but when your turn comes, you find yourself hesitating, unsure whether to wish as an Edwardian or as yourself. You finally settle on something timeless, warmth for the days ahead. Outside, snow begins to fall. It's the soft, hesitant kind that barely dares to land. The town glows beneath it, lamps turning to halos, roofs silvered like the pages of an illuminated manuscript. You imagine medieval monks walking the same lane centuries ago, their candles guttering against a winter gale. You wonder what they'd think of these Edwardians, half pious, half romantic, reviving their traditions mostly for comfort and charm. You stop near a shop window. Behind the glass, a display of candlesticks gleams, brass polished to perfection, beeswax stacked in tidy pyramids. The sign reads, "Guaranteed pure light." You grin at the marketing. Even reverence has a price tag in this new century. A passerby catches your smile and nods knowingly. Lovely sight, isn't it? My gran says they used to bless the farm candles, keep the spirits away. He lowers his voice conspiratorially. Still do it sometimes, even if the parson frowns. You realize how easily folklore hides in plain sight, like embers under ash, waiting for a breath to glow again. Night deepens, and with it the festival's quiet aftermath. Street lamps hiss to life, their gaslight sharp and white compared to the warm flicker of candles. The two forms of illumination duel silently across cobblestones, old light versus new. Somewhere a church door creaks, and you picture the last candles being snuffed out inside, smoke curling like phantom prayers. You wander back toward your lodging, boots crunching frost. Above you, the stars look freshly polished, the moon riding high over chimneys. You think about how Candlemas once marked the day people counted their remaining food stores, deciding if they'd make it to spring. You also remember reading how, by Edwardian times, it became more symbolic, an excuse for quaint rituals and sentimental pageantry. But the core remains the same: gratitude for light in whatever form it survives. As you reach your door, a small flame catches your eye. Someone left a candle burning on the stoop, a stub of wax flickering bravely against the wind. It shouldn't be left unattended, but you hesitate to blow it out. There's an old saying, "A Candlemas flame guards the home from storm." You smile, decide to let it burn a while longer, and slip inside. The warmth of your room greets you like a gentle sigh. You pour yourself a mug of something hot, cocoa, maybe, or a dangerously Edwardian sherry, and sink into a chair by the window. Outside, the candle still glows, stubbornly alive, its light mirrored in your glass. You think about how every era tries to reinvent the past to make sense of its own fears. The medieval world feared demons in the dark. The Edwardians feared losing meaning to machines and progress. And you? Well, you just fear your blanket slipping off at 3 a.m., but maybe that's all connected. Light against darkness, comfort against the unknown. A faint draft stirs the curtains, and for a moment the candle outside flares brighter, as if agreeing. Then, slowly, it gutters out, leaving behind a thin thread of smoke that curls like memory itself, fragile, fatting, but never truly gone. You finish your drink, set it down, and whisper to the empty room, "Bless this little light." Then you laugh softly at yourself, because really, who are you talking to? But the warmth that follows feels real enough. Somewhere beyond the frosty glass, a new day will rise, and with it, another Edwardian attempt to keep medieval fire alive. Through song, through ceremony, through stubborn human tenderness. You pull the blanket higher, the faint smell of candle wax lingering in the air. Sleep begins to gather like snowfall, slow and steady. You imagine the town outside fading into darkness, every house lit by one last flicker of hope. By the time the next weekend rolls around, you've thawed from Candlemas just enough to brave the Edwardian streets again. The air feels lighter now, still cold, but holding a kind of impatient promise, as if the whole town can sense that spring is stretching beneath the soil. You step outside and immediately hear the hum of distant drums. That sound isn't just weather or machinery, it's rehearsal. Today is the revival parade, the pride of this Edwardian town, where the present quite literally marches shoulder to shoulder with the Middle Ages. You follow the sound, boots echoing along cobblestones slick with last night's frost. As you near the town square, you spot color long before people. Banners hanging from lampposts, painted with lions, fleur-de-lis, and the occasional mysterious griffin. They flutter above heads like heraldic ghosts. Edwardians, it seems, were obsessed with symbolism, especially when it could be sewn onto bunting. The square bursts into view, a living carnival of medieval imagination filtered through Edwardian optimism. There are knights in shining armor made of aluminum, peasants in crisp linen freshly pressed by maids who clearly never saw a haystack, and troubadours with suspiciously polished boots. You can't help but grin. It's half history, half theater, and entirely charming. A woman selling programs intercepts you with the enthusiasm of someone who's had too much tea. "Historical pageant, the glory of the ages," she announces, thrusting a pamphlet into your hands. You glance at it. Each act lists a different era, culminating in the Edwardian ascendancy. Modesty clearly wasn't the event planner's strong suit. As you wander the crowd, you realize this isn't just entertainment, it's identity. These Edwardians are reinventing themselves through history. The medieval age, once dismissed as dark, is now seen as noble, pure, and somehow spiritually comforting in a world of motor cars and telegrams. Historians still argue whether these pageants were genuine acts of heritage or carefully staged propaganda for imperial pride. But as you watch children in paper crowns chase each other with wooden swords, it feels more like play than politics. Trumpets blare, the crowd parts, the parade begins. The first to appear are the Anglo-Saxon villagers, looking far too clean to have survived a real medieval winter. They carry sheaves of wheat, wooden flutes, and one absurdly happy goat. Behind them come armored crusaders, gleaming and dramatic, waving banners that catch the pale sun. You spot one knight whose helmet visor keeps slipping down over his face. His squire tries to fix it between salutes. History, you think, always did have a sense of humor. Then comes the royal court of Edward the Confessor, complete with velvet robes, faux jewels, and an oddly smug little boy dressed as the king himself. The crowd cheers. A brass band strikes up a slow march that somehow sounds both ecclesiastical and jazzy. You suspect the composer got carried away. A man beside you, clearly an enthusiast, leans in. "Fine pageantry, eh? Revives the Old English spirit." You nod politely, though you can't help wondering what Old English spirit he means. The one that built cathedrals or the one that burned heretics. He beams anyway. "All in good faith," he assures you. "Reminds us who we are." You smile because in a way he's right. The parade turns theatrical as it reaches the dais. Actors reenact moments from local legend. Saints banishing serpents, knights rescuing maidens, a friar miraculously producing ale from thin air. You suspect there's a flask involved. Children gasp and cheer, adults applaud, and you realize that for all its artifice, the show works. It pulls the town together, past and present braided like ribbons. At one point, a troupe of Morris dancers whirls into the square, bells jingling at their knees, faces flushed from both effort and cold. Their movements are older than the town itself, steps handed down through centuries, once banned for being unruly, now celebrated as patriotic heritage. An elderly man beats a drum with surprising vigor, his grin wide enough to light a room. You join in the clapping, your palms stinging but your heart oddly warm. Then comes the pageant's centerpiece, the parade of time. A massive float rolls into view, creaking like a ship, draped in painted linen that depicts the ages of man. At the front stands medieval England, represented by a young woman in a wimple holding a lantern, light of faith, according to the program. Behind her, a man in Renaissance garb holds a book, light of learning. At the back, A woman dressed as Britannia holds an electric torch that flickers uncertainly in the breeze. The symbolism isn't subtle, but it's sincere. A hush falls as the mayor, resplendent in robes trimmed with fake ermine, steps forward to deliver a speech. His voice carries through a tin megaphone. Let us honor the ages that built our greatness. From humble village to mighty empire, the flame of civilization has never dimmed. The crowd erupts in cheers, though one small boy mutters, "Except when it rains." His mother hushes him, but you silently agree. Still, there's something moving about it, the collective belief that history is a story worth parading. After the speeches, the crowd disperses into side streets where stalls offer everything from medieval toffee, probably Edwardian in recipe, to authentic ale, served in suspiciously modern glass mugs. You wander past a stage where amateur actors perform a morality play. The devil, wearing bright red tights and an over-enthusiastic grin, keeps tripping over his own tail. The audience howls with laughter. Somewhere, a purist historian is probably fainting. You pause near a tent selling painted lanterns. The vendor, a woman with ink-stained fingers, explains that each design is inspired by medieval manuscript motifs, tiny dragons, saints, and stars. You buy one shaped like a tower, and when she lights it for you, the paper walls glow gold and scarlet. "They say light remembers," she whispers. You nod, unsure whether she means history or hope. As dusk settles, the parade concludes with a torchlit procession. Hundreds of participants march through the streets, their faces gilded by firelight. Drums echo off brick facades and the banners shimmer like living embers. You fall into step with the crowd, swept along by rhythm and heat. The sound of chanting rises, not Latin, not English, but a kind of collective hum that transcends both. For a moment, the Edwardians and their medieval muses seem to merge. The procession leads to the town green, where a wooden platform has been erected. Upon it stands a replica of an ancient beacon tower stacked with kindling and pitch. The mayor gives another speech, mercifully shorter this time, then signals to a costumed monk to set the torch. The flame catches slowly, licking upward until it roars to life. The crowd gasps, then cheers. Sparks spiral into the night, reflecting in 1,000 upturned faces. It's beautiful, ridiculous, and utterly human. Fire has always been both spectacle and sanctuary. In the medieval world, it was a signal, beacons lit on hilltops to warn of invasion or celebrate victory. In the Edwardian one, it's theater, a reminder that progress hasn't extinguished wonder. You stand there for a long time, hands outstretched to the warmth, watching the flames devour their careful carpentry. The drums fade, replaced by the crackle of burning pine. The crowd's cheers mellow into murmurs, then into the low buzz of contentment. Someone passes you a cup of hot cider and you take a grateful sip. Sweet, smoky, slightly spiced, the taste of old traditions reheated. A few feet away, a young woman sketches the scene by lamplight, her pencil darting across the page. She catches your eye and smiles. "It's funny," she says. "We think we're celebrating the past, but really we're just inventing it." You nod. She's right again. The medievalism of Edwardian England is less about accuracy and more about yearning, for simplicity, for connection, for a world that seemed to make sense because it was already gone. As the fire dwindles, you hear distant church bells and the hiss of gas lamps being relit in the streets beyond. Slowly, people begin to leave, their torches extinguished, their laughter trailing like smoke. You linger, unwilling to let the night end. The air smells of ash and oranges from someone's pocket feast. When you finally turn to go, you glance back at the smoldering beacon. The coals pulse like a heartbeat, fatting but steady. You imagine all the generations that stood before such fires, peasants, priests, pageant-goers, each seeing their own reflection in the glow. The medievals looked for divine light, the Edwardians for nostalgic beauty. And you, maybe you're just looking for a good story before bed. You make your way home through quiet lanes. Lanterns swing gently above doors, the painted paper now soft and translucent. Somewhere behind a curtained window, a gramophone plays a waltz, modern music, but its rhythm echoes the drums from earlier. Time folds neatly in on itself. At your lodging, you set the paper lantern from the fair on your windowsill. When you light it, the tiny dragons and saints dance in golden motion, casting miniature shadows on the wall. The room fills with that unmistakable mix of smoke and wonder. Outside, the last embers of the beacon fade into the night. Inside, your little lantern keeps glowing. Edwardian imitation or not, it feels real enough. You lie back, eyelids heavy, still hearing faint drums in your mind, the heartbeat of centuries refusing to go out. And somewhere between waking and sleep, you realize that this is what the revival parade was truly about. Not accuracy, but continuity. The wish to remember and to belong, even if the history you march for was half a dream all along. The next evening drifts in quietly, as if even the sky is a little tired from all the pageantry. Clouds hang low and soft, the air tinged with the faint metallic smell of spent fireworks and cooling cobblestone. You step outside anyway, your coat still faintly perfumed by smoke and cider, and find yourself following the distant murmur of instruments. It's subtle at first, almost mistaken for wind, but then you catch the unmistakable sound of strings being tuned. You wander toward the glow of lanterns that cluster like fireflies along the river walk. The Edwardians called this part of town the Embankment Promenade, though by the look of it tonight, it might as well be a medieval fairground reborn. Paper lanterns dangle from iron posts, their lights soft and honey-colored. Gas lamps shimmer higher up, mixing with the moon's reflection in the water. Somewhere, someone strikes a note on a lute, yes, an actual lute, and laughter follows, warm and slightly self-conscious. You pause on the bridge. Beneath it, ripples carry fragments of melody. Violins, a penny whistle, maybe even a harp. The music seems to belong to several centuries at once, half madrigal, half music hall tune. You smile because of course it does. The Edwardians loved their anachronisms the way they loved marmalade, slightly bitter but delightful nonetheless. A program pinned to a lamppost announces Evening of Medieval Airs and Folk Fantasias, presented by the Society for Ancient Harmony. That name sounds both noble and slightly pretentious, which, you decide, is a perfect summary of Edwardian charm. You drift closer, joining the crowd gathered on the riverside lawn. Rugs and wicker chairs dot the grass. Gentlemen in tweed sit beside ladies wrapped in shawls, sipping from thermoses and pretending not to shiver. At the center, beneath a canopy strung with colored lanterns, stands a small orchestra, violins, flutes, a cello, and astonishingly, a hurdy-gurdy whose owner cranks it with dignified pride. The conductor, a tall man with silver hair and the posture of someone who believes deeply in beauty, raises his baton. The hum of conversation dies. The first piece begins, slow, solemn, and strangely familiar. It's a rearrangement of a medieval hymn, God Maria Virgo, softened and stretched into an Edwardian lullaby. The notes glide across the water, trembling like candlelight. You close your eyes. For a moment, you could be in a monastery courtyard centuries ago, monks humming under vaulted stone. But when you open them, you see instead an audience of motorcar owners and journalists, all spellbound by an illusion they helped create. Historians still argue whether Edwardian medievalism was escapism or earnest devotion. Listening to this, you think maybe it was both, the need to believe in something timeless amid the tick of progress. Halfway through the hymn, the cellist's bow snaps with a sharp crack. The audience gasps, then chuckles, and the conductor bows gallantly, announcing, even in history, strings sometimes break. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Someone offers the cellist a spare bow because, apparently, Edwardian audiences come prepared for musical emergencies. You take a quiet sip of cocoa from a borrowed flask and murmur, "Show business," to no one in particular. The next tune is livelier, a folk dance resurrected from a 14th century manuscript found in the British Museum, or so the conductor claims. The melody hops along like a mischievous spirit, and before long people start tapping their feet, their Edwardian restraint melting into rhythm. A few couples even get up to dance. You watch them, skirts swaying, boots crunching grass, and think how funny it is that after centuries of change, people still measure joy by whether they can dance without embarrassment. You catch sight of a girl in a lavender dress dancing alone near the lantern posts. She spins in time with the fiddle, her laughter catching in the air like wind chimes. A man joins her, awkward at first, then more confident as the rhythm carries him. Their shadows twirl across the grass, two silhouettes that could belong to any century. You feel a strange tug in your chest, the kind that history gives you when it stops being academic and starts being alive. As the music pauses for intermission, you stroll along the river. Vendors sell roasted chestnuts, mulled wine, and ye olde biscuits, which you suspect are just shortbread with extra marketing. Children wave small paper lanterns on sticks, their faces glowing like miniature moons. The smell of nutmeg and smoke lingers. Somewhere nearby, a group of students sings part of a ballad in three-part harmony, slightly off-key but entirely joyful. You overhear an older man explaining to his grandson how medieval musicians tuned by ear because they hadn't invented proper pitch yet. You stifle a laugh, half wrong, half adorable. Then again, Edwardians were great at filling gaps in history with confidence and charm. Maybe that's part of why we still love them. When the concert resumes, the musicians play an instrumental piece inspired by the age of chivalry. The violins imitate the clatter of hooves, the flutes evoke larks over meadows, and the hurdy-gurdy drones like distant bells. The melody swells until it seems to lift the very air. The conductor looks transported. His eyes shine as if he's personally shaking hands with the 13th century. And yet, beneath the grandeur, there's something tender. You realize the Edwardians aren't trying to recreate the Middle Ages. They're trying to remember what it felt like to hope. In an empire shadowed by change, nostalgia becomes a form of courage. The music softens. The lanterns tremble in a cool gust, their colors rippling across faces like stained glass in motion. The final chord lingers, a single, trembling note that hangs in the night, then fades into applause. You clap too, though part of you wishes it hadn't ended. Silence after beauty always feels a little too large. The conductor bows deeply. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "we thank not only the past for its inspiration, but the night for allowing us to borrow its stillness." It's a bit theatrical but lovely. The crowd murmurs approval. Afterward, people linger, unwilling to break the spell. A few lanterns are released onto the river, their reflections trailing downstream like tiny golden boats. You watch until they disappear around the bend, wondering how many other evenings through history have ended this way, with music, light, and the quiet ache of wanting it to last. A young musician approaches the railing beside you, still holding his violin. "Did you enjoy it?" he asks, shyly proud. You nod. "It sounded like time remembering itself." He smiles, clearly pleased. "That's what we hoped for, to make history hum again." He tucks the violin under his arm and adds, "Funny thing, half those melodies were guesses. The manuscripts only show notation, no rhythm. We have to imagine the heartbeat." Then he disappears into the crowd, leaving you thinking about how much of the past is guesswork set to music. The night deepens. Lanterns dim one by one, the wind snuffing their flames like a careful librarian closing a book. Somewhere, the hurdy-gurdy player packs away his instrument, humming softly to himself. You turn back toward the bridge. Across the river, faint strains of another tune drift from a pub. the kind of cheerful, slightly bawdy song that no doubt scandalized someone's gray tan. It mingles with the crickets, with footsteps, with the low hum of the modern world pushing at the edges of the dream. You pause halfway across the bridge and look down. The river reflects the last of the lanterns, tiny fragments of light trembling on black water. It reminds you of a medieval manuscript margin, where gold leaf catches the candle's glow just before the page turns. You rest your hands on the cold railing and breathe in the mingled scents of water, wax, and winter. You think of the musicians, of their careful reenactments and earnest mistakes. You think of how the Edwardians used sound to mend the rift between progress and memory. Perhaps you realize that's what all music is, a bridge we keep rebuilding across centuries of silence. A final gust of wind rattles the lantern strings. One breaks loose and sails upward, caught in an invisible current. You follow it with your eyes until it's just a fading dot against the clouds. Somewhere far above, perhaps a medieval angel mistakes it for a soul finally finding its song. You smile to yourself, hands warming in your pockets. Behind you, laughter echoes faintly, blending with the river's slow applause against the banks. The concert is over, but the melody lingers, soft, cyclical, infinite, like time, like light. You head home through narrow lanes glowing faintly with leftover lanterns. Each one feels like a punctuation mark in a story that refuses to end. You hum the hymn under your breath, the one that began the evening, God Maria Virgo, and realize it's still beautiful even off-key. Maybe that's the point. When you reach your door, you stop for a moment to listen. In the distance, a violin plays one last phrase before falling silent. You whisper a quiet thanks to the night for its music, its patience, its willingness to let the past borrow its stage. Inside, you light a single candle on your table. Its flame wavers, catches steady, and throws a small circle of light across the room. You watch it flicker and imagine that somewhere, centuries ago, another listener did the same, holding onto brightness, humming a familiar tune, believing that the darkness would pass. You smile, close your eyes, and let the echo of strings guide you into stillness. The morning after the concert arrives with a hush that feels earned. Outside your window, the mist curls low over the cobblestones, and a milk cart rattles by, its wheels murmuring through puddles left by last night's drizzle. The world smells faintly of coal smoke and baking bread, a perfume that feels both domestic and eternal. Somewhere down the lane, you hear a voice calling, "To market, the fair's begun." The Edwardians adored their markets. To them, the bustle of trade wasn't merely commerce. It was performance, inheritance, memory. The old medieval spirit of the fairground never quite died. It simply learned to wear a cleaner collar. And today, you're about to step into its living echo. You pull on your coat and step into the damp morning air. The streets are already waking. Chimney sweeps singing half-forgotten ballads, flower girls with baskets swinging from their elbows, and the faint clang of a church bell announcing the hour. The sound seems to hang in the mist, as though reluctant to let go. You follow the noise of laughter and wheels toward the market square. By the time you reach it, the fog has lifted enough to reveal a scene that could have been lifted straight from a medieval tapestry, if that tapestry had been painted with Edwardian restraint and just a hint of middle-class ambition. Rows of stalls stretch in every direction, their awnings striped in cream and burgundy. Smoke rises from roasting nuts and chestnuts, filling the air with warmth and sweetness. Bunting flutters between lampposts, and over everything drifts the faint music of a hurdy-gurdy. Somewhere, a small brass band attempts to play Greensleeves, though the rhythm wobbles with charming imperfection. You pause at the edge, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer density of life. A costermonger calls out about his apples, as red as a knight's banner, while a baker hawks honey cakes shaped like crowns. A small boy dressed as a medieval page hands out pamphlets advertising Sir Lionel's wonders of the past, a moving panorama of England's glories. You smile. Clearly, history has learned the art of marketing. It's not just the wares that catch your eye, but the costumes. The Edwardians, ever nostalgic, have decided that today's market will double as a medieval day, blending civic pride with historical fantasy. Shopkeepers wear mock doublets, children sport paper crowns, and even the constable's helmet has been humorously adorned with a sprig of ivy. You wander among them, hands tucked into your coat, and every step feels like crossing a threshold in time. A woman selling ribbons greets you with a conspiratorial grin. "For luck," she says, pressing a length of green silk into your palm. Tied on the wrist, it keeps envy away. They said so in King Henry's time, and who am I to argue? You thank her, slip a coin into her tin, and tie the ribbon loosely around your wrist. Historians still argue whether such medieval charms were ever widely believed in or merely tolerated as superstition. But here, in this moment, the boundary between fact and fancy feels irrelevant. You're in a place where belief is an accessory, one you can wear lightly, just for the day. You turn a corner and nearly walk into a troupe of performers dressed as wandering minstrels. They carry fiddles, tambourines, and a drum painted with a red lion. One of them, a man with an outrageous feather in his cap, winks and begins to sing. "Oh, come to the market where echoes abide, where time sells its trinkets and memory hides." The tune is infectious. Soon a small crowd gathers, clapping in rhythm. Children dance in circles, ribbons streaming from their sleeves. An elderly woman taps her cane in time, her face glowing with delight. You catch yourself smiling, one of those unguarded smiles that sneaks past reason. Behind the singers, a stall displays antique lanterns, some genuine medieval relics, others lovingly faked. The vendor, a bearded man with spectacles like magnifying lenses, claims each one has held the same flame since Edward the Confessor. You suspect exaggeration, but his patter is irresistible. You pick up one lantern, small, dented, with a cloudy glass window, and imagine how many hands have carried its light through dark alleys, long before gas or electricity tamed the night. "Feel the weight of it," the vendor says. "See, not just iron, but time itself." You laugh, hand over a few shillings, and walk away with your new acquisition. It's absurd, of course, but also strangely moving, a tangible reminder that every glow owes its existence to a wick and a little faith. Farther along, the fair grows louder. The scent of roasting meat mingles with the perfume of flowers and the tang of horses. A puppet show draws a noisy crowd, its stage painted with knights, dragons, and damsels who seem far too self-possessed to need saving. A boy narrates the tale in a broad accent, his voice breaking occasionally as he shouts, "Beware, brave sir, the dragon hungers for your virtue." The audience roars with laughter, not because it's accurate, but because it's alive. As you move deeper into the square, you realize how carefully choreographed this chaos is. Every sound, every scent, every burst of laughter feels spontaneous, but behind it lies Edwardian order, the quiet control of people who adore the past as long as it behaves itself. Medieval life was filthy, dangerous, often brutal. But here, it's been laundered, perfumed, and packaged into something safe to remember. It's the Middle Ages reimagined as a Sunday outing. You pause beside a fortune-teller's tent. The sign reads, "Madame Esme, Prophecies of the Old World." Inside, the air smells of incense and damp canvas. The woman behind the table wears a shawl patterned with stars and speaks with the sort of accent that no geography could claim. "You've walked through centuries today," she murmurs, tracing the lines on your palm. "You carry other lives in your shadow. Be careful which one wakes." You chuckle, One of your light jokes slips out almost reflexively. If I start craving mead instead of tea, I'll know it worked. She smiles undeterred. Oh, you're closer than you think. Outside, the drizzle starts again, thin and silver. The market doesn't mind. Umbrellas bloom, lanterns are relit, and the music grows louder to challenge the weather. You find shelter beneath an awning and watch the scene unfold. The puddles turn into mirrors where bunting and faces reflect like fragments of stained glass. A horse shakes its mane, scattering droplets like sequins. It's here amid the chatter that you overhear two historians amateurs clearly debating beside a pie stall. The medieval fair was the lifeblood of local economy, says one, chewing earnestly. You could buy anything from spices to salvation. The other snorts. Salvation was extra. You can't help laughing out loud, and they grin, happy to have found a fellow traveler in absurdity. Nearby, the town crier mounts a small platform, bell in hand. Hear ye, he shouts. The procession of craft begins. From the far end of the square comes a parade of guilds, modern tradesmen dressed as medieval artisans. The blacksmith carries a toy anvil, the printer brandishes a wooden press, and the schoolteacher waves a banner that reads, "Knowledge for king and commoner." The crowd applauds with enthusiasm, children darting between legs to grab tossed ribbons. This is more than nostalgia, it's ritual. The Edwardians are retelling the story of progress as a pageant, reminding themselves that their world didn't spring from nowhere. It grew from toil, invention, and, yes, a little myth-making. And maybe that's the point. History isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember beautifully. You wander toward the edge of the square where the fair begins to thin. Here the noise softens into murmur. You pass a line of older stalls selling books and curiosities, dusty tomes with gilt spines, medieval-style prayer beads, fragments of stained glass labeled authentic 14th century, probably. You pick up one shard, hold it to the light, and the day outside shimmers ruby-red through it. For a heartbeat, the market disappears. You're standing in a medieval church, sunlight bleeding through colored glass, dust motes swirling like holy confetti. A bell rings somewhere deep within stone walls. You blink and the vision fades. The shard is just glass again. But your pulse lingers on that ghostly frequency, caught between centuries. You realize suddenly that the market isn't winding down. It's winding deeper, slipping into something softer, dreamier. The band begins to play again, slower this time, and people start to gather toward the center where lanterns are being lit for evening. The fair's glow intensifies against the gray sky. A young boy passes carrying a tray of candles, calling, "Lanterns for luck, lanterns for love." You buy one without thinking. Its flame sputters for a moment before catching, steady and warm. All around, the other candles flare to life, and the marketplace becomes a constellation of golden points. Someone starts singing, a simple refrain everyone seems to know. The melody might be new or 500 years old. It doesn't matter. The voices blend until the words lose meaning and become pure sound. You hum along, letting the tune settle into your bones. The drizzle stops. The air clears. The market's noise recedes into a low, steady rhythm like a heartbeat beneath the cobbles. You realize the fair has done something extraordinary. It's collapsed the distance between ages. The medieval and the modern, the past and the present, have met here, not as rivals but as companions. As you turn to leave, you glance back at the square. Lanterns sway gently in the evening breeze, their reflections rippling in the puddles like tiny, trembling suns. The music drifts behind you, fading into the hum of life returning to ordinary hours. You walk home slowly, the green ribbon still tied around your wrist, the iron lantern tucked under your arm, and a faint tune in your head you can't quite name. It feels older than words, but familiar in a way that makes you smile. And though you know the fair will pack up by dawn, its echoes will linger, in the scent of roasted nuts, in the dust of your shoes, and somewhere deep in your chest, where memory hums like a string struck long ago. You wake to the scent of smoke, pleasant smoke, not the kind that brings fear, but the kind that whispers of pine wood and bonfires and roasted apples. It's midsummer now in Edwardian England, and though the empire pretends it's too modern for ancient rites, something older stirs beneath the surface tonight. The air has a tremor in it, a faint shimmer of heat and mischief. You can almost feel the land itself stretching its arms after months of damp grayness. You follow the sound of laughter down a narrow lane. The houses here wear crowns of green boughs and wildflowers. Windowsills are dusted with petals. Everyone seems to have taken leave from respectability for one evening. The baker, who normally frowns at dogs in his doorway, now hands out honeyed cakes to barefoot children. The cobbler's wife is wearing a wreath of oak leaves, her respectable bonnet forgotten at home. The church bells ring, slow and heavy, but no one is headed to prayer, at least, not the kind that happens indoors. The festival of midsummer fire calls people out into the twilight, just as it did centuries before, when their medieval ancestors gathered to light torches against the darkness, hopping to scare away spirits and diseases. Historians still argue whether the fire's true purpose was religious or purely practical, to keep the night insects and livestock pests at bay. But for the Edwardians, it has become something gentler, half nostalgia, half rebellion. You step into the village green, and it's as if the world has been painted gold. Long tables groan beneath platters of bread, bowls of cherries, and roasted meat. The glow of lanterns overlaps with the first leap of flames in the bonfire's heart. Sparks swirl up like orange moths. You can feel the heat brushing your face, a reminder of how close warmth and danger once were when winter was always a threat. There's a brass band tuning up near the lich gate, 3 trumpets, one rather nervous clarinet, and a drummer who seems too fond of his instrument. The music is jaunty, but something about the rhythm feels older than the notes. Beneath the cheerful brass, you can almost hear the ghost of a medieval pipe and tabor, the instruments that once led May Day dancers in circles until dawn. The Edwardians pretend they invented fun, but you and I both know they're borrowing it from their ancestors. A local historian, small, bearded, the sort who always smells faintly of ink, explains to a curious visitor that the fire must be lit by the oldest resident of the parish. It's tradition, he says proudly, carried down from the 14th century. The visitor nods solemnly, unaware that the oldest resident is currently asleep in her chair and has been for 3 festivals in a row. Instead, a boy of 12, grinning nervously, steps forward with a torch, guided by the vicar's wife. The crowd hums approval. When the fire takes, there's a gasp. It's not just wood burning, it's pine, resin, and a hidden bundle of herbs. The Edwardians believed, or pretended to believe, that throwing certain herbs into the flames could bring luck for the harvest. You watch lavender and sage turn to purple sparks. Someone tosses in a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, and a lady murmurs that it's for her brother lost in South Africa. The air thickens with scent, history, and a little sadness. Then come the games. Not sports exactly, more like ritualized chaos. The young men form a ring and leap over the smaller fire pits, each jump cheered as if it guarantees love or fortune. Mind your eyebrows, someone shouts, and a burst of laughter ripples across the field. In the distance, children chase each other with fire-tipped rushes, while their mothers pretend not to see. You probably wouldn't survive this if you tried it today. Insurance policies weren't built for folk magic. Near the main bonfire, a group of women perform a circle dance. Their skirts swirl like embers, voices rising on a melody that's half hymn, half spell. It's said that this song dates back to the Plantagenets, though no one can quite trace the tune. Historians still argue whether it was once a charm to keep witches away or a blessing to call them forth, whispers an old man beside you. He looks delighted by the mystery. You notice his walking stick is carved with a sunwheel symbol, ancient, pagan, quietly defiant beneath his stiff Edwardian collar. The band strikes up a reel, and before long, even the vicar joins in. You dance because it feels like the only reasonable thing to do. The ground beneath your shoes is warm from the fires, and you can almost imagine the soil itself breathing beneath you, remembering. The Edwardians, for all their progress, railways, telegraphs, electric lights, still crave connection to the earth. Theirs is a world teetering between the old and the new, between candlelight and current, superstition and science. They hold both in their hands tonight like a child holding two sparklers, not sure which to let go of first. As the night deepens, the bonfire becomes a heartbeat in the darkness. Couples drift toward its glow, exchanging looks that probably shouldn't be exchanged in public. There's a sweetness in the air, mixed with ale and the faint char of roasted barley. The fire crackles, whispering secrets that the Edwardians pretend not to believe in anymore. Then someone begins the wheel of fire. You've heard of it, an old custom from the medieval solstice. They build a wooden wheel, set it ablaze, and roll it down a hill to symbolize the sun's descent after midsummer. Of course, modern safety regulations have tamed it into a glowing metal hoop swung over a patch of damp grass. Still, when the hoop arcs through the dark, flames tracing a golden circle in the air, everyone cheers. It's as though they've glimpsed time folding back on itself. Centuries of light and laughter layered into one perfect glowing ring. You wander from the crowd for a while. Behind the church, the shadows are cool and soft. Fireflies blink in the hedge. You spot an older couple sitting together, holding hands. The woman hums the midsummer tune quietly under her breath. The man, eyes closed, murmurs, "We used to dance to this before the war." You realize how many layers of meaning this night holds. For some, it's play. For others, remembrance. For a few, an act of hope that the wheel will keep turning. A little girl runs up to you holding a jar. Inside it flickers a candle stub surrounded by petals. "They call it a fairy lamp," she says solemnly. "If you make a wish and set it on the pond, it might come true." You thank her, light the candle from the bonfire, and watch as she carries it to the water's edge. Soon the pond is covered in tiny lights, drifting like stars fallen to earth. The reflection of the fire shimmers across them, and for a moment, you can't tell where the sky ends and the water begins. The festival begins to quiet. People sit in clusters, sharing stories. Someone tells of an Edwardian archaeologist who once claimed to have found evidence of a pre-Christian fire pit beneath this very village, proof that the bonfires never really stopped, just changed names. "They say the ground remembers," he insists. Another man laughs, and so do we. You find yourself thinking about the invisible threads that tie eras together. The Edwardians built railways, but they also built rituals out of memory. Every flame tonight is a small defiance against forgetting. Even the act of lighting candles, so ordinary now, feels ancient when done in a crowd. You realize that in the glow of the midsummer fire, the Edwardians aren't pretending to be medieval. They're admitting that they never stopped being a little medieval after all. By midnight, the last log collapses into the embers. The air cools, perfumed with ash and meadowsweet. Someone begins a final verse, a lullaby this time. The tune drifts upward with the smoke. It's almost enough to put you to sleep where you stand. The stars overhead pulse faintly, mirroring the coals below. You turn toward the path home. Behind you, the crowd is dispersing slowly, carrying lanterns that bob like will-o'-the-wisps down the lanes. In the hush that follows, you can hear a nightjar's call and the faint rustle of grass. The fire's reflection still lingers in your eyes, a gentle afterimage that will fade only when dawn touches the roofs. And as you walk, the wind stirs, soft, warm, full of the scent of things that once were. You can almost imagine the medieval villagers watching from beyond the centuries, approving. After all, what is time, if not a circle of fire rolling endlessly down a hill? You wake to the rustle of wheat. The wind hums through the fields in slow, drowsy waves, brushing against the golden stalks like a hand smoothing hair. The summer has turned and the light feels softer now, less wild, more honeyed. The Edwardians call this the quiet season, but that's a lie. Quiet is the surface. Beneath it, every village is secretly preparing for the harvest mask. It begins with a whisper, the first sheaf of wheat cut and tied with ribbon. The act seems innocent enough, but you can sense its weight, an echo of a medieval ritual so old that even the priests once frowned upon it. Back then, they called it the corn spirit, a presence said to live in the final uncut stalks of the field. To slay it was both blessing and danger. So to keep the spirit happy, farmers would weave that last sheaf into a doll, dress it in ribbons, and carry it home as though it were a guest. Edwardians, with their railways and newspapers and telegraphs, pretend they don't believe such things. But every harvest, someone still makes a doll. You find yourself standing in one of those golden fields. The scent of cut wheat is sweet and heavy, like warm bread and dust. Women in linen aprons bend to gather bundles, their laughter mingling with the soft clatter of sickles. The men work slower now. They're saving their strength for the night ahead. Even the horses seem to know that something's coming, something ancient that wears a smile. By twilight, the field is empty except for one figure, a young girl carrying the last sheaf tied with red silk. She's solemn, almost reverent. The crowd watches her cross the stubble, her steps careful, as if she's balancing time itself in her arms. You follow her toward the barn, where lanterns already glow between the rafters. The air inside hums with excitement and dust. This is where the harvest mask will unfold, a performance that's part feast, part theater, part dream. The musicians are tuning up again. This time it's fiddles and concertinas, and the notes twist through the air like smoke. You spot a group of villagers dressing behind a hay curtain. One dons a paper crown, another a robe stitched with gold thread and straw. There's laughter, some teasing, and a lot of misplaced feathers. You quickly realize this is no ordinary masquerade. It's a reenactment, a reimagined echo of the medieval plough plays, those half-religious, half-rowdy dramas once performed by farmers for luck and ale. A local schoolteacher stands at the edge of the barn, directing the chaos with the weary pride of a man who's taught this same play for 20 years. "Now, Thomas," he says to the young man in the straw robe, "remember, you're the spirit of the corn. Don't grin like a fool when you fall." Thomas nods, immediately grins like a fool, and nearly drops his wooden scythe. The lights dim, well, not dim so much as flicker, because this is an Edwardian barn and the lights are oil lamps. Someone whispers the opening lines and the play begins. The crowd hushes, though you can still hear the shuffling of skirts and the faint whine of a dog outside. The spirit of the corn walks solemnly to the center. He's followed by a figure in white, the harvest maiden. Her gown is simple muslin, but the lantern light turns it into liquid gold. She speaks in rhyme, her words borrowed from a medieval carol. "Cut me down, yet let me live. In winter's arms, my gift I give." You feel the old magic tugging beneath the words. The story is simple. The spirit of the corn must die so that the people may eat, but he will rise again with the spring. The Edwardians clap politely, but some of them blink faster than usual, pretending the smoke is in their eyes. As the play goes on, the barn becomes an altar of movement and sound. Children throw handfuls of chaff like confetti. The fiddles rise to a frantic pitch. When the spirit finally falls, it's with theatrical flair, but the silence that follows feels real. For a heartbeat, The entire room is caught in something older than any of them can name. Historians still argue whether these rituals were pagan or just poetic inventions of hungry minds. But standing here, watching the flicker of light on the wheat doll's face, you know it doesn't matter. Belief is belief, however softly it's held. Then comes the laughter and with it relief. The spirit leaps up, alive again, to cheers and applause. The harvest maiden bows. The band crashes into a reel. The barn doors swing open to reveal the night sky, deep and full of stars. You step outside, blinking, half expecting to see medieval torches in place of the Edwardian lanterns. The air smells of cider, hay, and roasted apples. Someone's cooking over a brazier, and the scent makes your stomach growl audibly enough to draw a grin from a nearby farmer. The feast begins. Long tables are set beneath garlands of ivy and hops. Platters of bread, meat pies, cheese, and sweet puddings vanish quickly. A girl passes by carrying a tray of harvest jellies, bright orange and quivering like sunlight caught in glass. You're handed a mug of cider that tastes like liquid fire and honey. The first sip burns, the second heals. You sit among strangers who talk as if you've known them all your life. That's what these festivals do. They erase the small distances between people. A gentleman explains that his grandfather once played the same role of the corn spirit when Queen Victoria still ruled. Funny, isn't it? He muses. We're supposed to be the future, but we keep dressing like the past. A woman across the table laughs softly. Maybe the past is just too comfortable to leave behind. She lifts her mug toward the lanterns. The light catches the curve of her wrist, the gleam of her ring, and for a second you glimpse both her Edwardian grace and her medieval soul. The band plays again, this time something slower, almost wistful. The crowd hums along. Out of the corner of your eye, you notice a shadow moving at the edge of the field, a figure tall and still, crowned with what looks like wheat. When you blink, it's gone. Probably just a trick of the firelight, though the girl beside you whispers. They say the corn spirit watches every harvest, just to make sure we remember him kindly. You smile, but you can't help glancing back toward the field. Later, as the music softens, a storyteller stands. He wears no mask, just a cap and a voice like oak bark. He begins to tell of the first harvest ever brought to this village, of how the medieval reapers believed the last stalk held the soul of the field, and how, when the cold came, they would keep that sheaf in the house for luck. Some say the first farmers learned it from the Druids, he adds with a twinkle in his eye. Others say they just liked an excuse to keep straw indoors. Laughter ripples around him, gentle as wheat swaying. Someone brings out the harvest doll, now standing in a small basket decorated with berries. She'll go to the manor house tonight, the storyteller explains. They'll keep her by the hearth till spring. The gesture feels simple, but you sense its weight. It's a promise that life, however fragile, will return. A bell rings, marking the play's end, but no one leaves. The night has deepened, the stars wheeling above like sparks from some celestial forge. Couples drift into the field, the stubble crackling beneath their shoes. The air carries the faint hum of insects and the low murmur of contented voices. You walk among them, the warmth of cider still in your chest, and feel the curious sensation that you've crossed time without moving. The Edwardians will return tomorrow to their trains and telegrams, to polite breakfasts and morning newspapers. But tonight, they belong to something older, a rhythm older than empire, older even than words. The harvest may be gathered, but the story never ends. It only waits for the next planting, the next turning of the wheel. You take one last look at the barn. Inside, the lanterns are burning low, their light trembling against the rafters. The wheat doll sits near the door, watching or maybe just waiting. Either way, it feels right to nod your thanks before you go. And as you step into the night, a soft wind stirs through the field again, whispering through the cut stalks. You can almost make out the rhythm of the tune the fiddler played, carried faintly on the air. It sounds like the earth breathing, like a lullaby for the land itself. The last echo of the harvest song fades behind you, leaving only the hush of early dawn. A thin mist clings to the hedgerows, softening every edge, the hayricks, the steeple, even the old stone wall that guides your path. You walk slower now, not out of weariness but out of a strange kind of awe. The Edwardians may live in the age of iron and smoke, but here, in the quiet between festivals, they are still surrounded by the bones of the Middle Ages. You turn a corner and find yourself before a church, small, weathered, and proud in its crooked way. Its walls are mottled with lichen, its windows narrow like sleepy eyes. The sign says St. Hilda's, restored 1903, but the stones themselves remember 1,000 years. The restoration was meant to modernize it, new pews, fresh glass. But as you push open the wooden door, the smell tells the truth. Old dust, candle wax, and rainwater, the perfume of centuries. Inside, the light is pale gold. It falls across carved angels whose faces have been smoothed by both devotion and time. The Edwardian vicar, a tall man with a poet's hair and a banker's waistcoat, stands near the altar arranging flowers. "She's a Norman beauty, isn't she?" he says with pride. You nod, and he chuckles softly. "We like to think we saved her from ruin, but I suspect she just tolerated us." You walk down the aisle, your fingers brushing the pews. Each groove, each dent, is a story. A medieval hand placing a palm there in prayer, an Edwardian child hiding from a sermon, a soldier leaving fingerprints of candle soot before a march. Historians still argue whether these village restorations were acts of preservation or desecration. Did the Edwardians save medieval art or strip it of its soul? But as the vicar hums a hymn that sounds older than both of you, it's clear that love, not certainty, kept these walls standing. A soft voice interrupts your thoughts. An older woman, her shawl the color of storm clouds, is dusting the font. "Mind the carvings," she warns. You lean closer and see a pair of intertwined beasts, half lion, half serpent, curling around the base. "We keep them," she explains, "because they're good luck. My grandmother said they guard against floods." You smile, remembering how every age has its private myth. She winks. Even the vicar believes it, though he'd never admit it. Outside, the morning has thickened into a luminous gray. The churchyard stretches ahead, uneven with time. Some of the stones are so old their names have melted away, leaving only symbols: a cross, a sun, a bird. You trace one with your finger and realize that the gesture itself is ancient, a small defiance against forgetting. The grass is damp beneath your shoes, and the distant toll of a bell seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As you leave the churchyard, you follow the lane downhill toward the town. The road widens into a square lined with Edwardian brick buildings, post office, tea shop, bank. But rising in the center is something far older, a medieval market cross, weathered to the color of bone. Children play around its base, oblivious to its history. A sign nearby declares, "Preserved by local subscription, 1898. You can almost imagine the fundraising committee. Ladies with parasols, gentlemen with stiff collars, raising coins to save a relic from their own progress. You pause at a cafe. The owner, a wiry man with ink-stained hands, tells you the building once belonged to a blacksmith. "We found the old forge under the floorboards," he says proudly. "Still had soot on it." He gestures toward the hearth, now polished and trimmed with blue tiles. "We kept it there. Good for business." There's a twinkle in his eye, the same glimmer of superstition that refuses to die even in the age of telegraphs. As you sip your tea, you glance out the window. Beyond the square, half hidden by ivy, stands a ruin, a monastery or what's left of one. You feel drawn to it, as if some ancient thread is tugging you forward. You thank the cafe owner and step back into the sunlight, which has turned the mist into a faint silver veil. The path to the ruins winds through meadows where sheep graze in slow, eternal rhythm. You can almost hear the faint chant of monks over the breeze, or maybe it's just your imagination filling in the silence. The abbey gate still stands, though the wood has long since rotted. Beyond it, the arches rise like ribs against the sky. It's hard not to feel small here. The Edwardians certainly did. When they rediscovered such ruins, they called them picturesque, perfect for picnics and sketches. But standing beneath the empty windows, you sense they found something more profound. In their letters, they called it ruin fever, an ache for what was lost. Some said it was the ghost of faith itself, lingering in the air. Others said it was just good marketing for postcards. Historians still argue, but you suspect it was both. You wander through the cloister, your footsteps stirring dust that may not have moved for centuries. A broken column bears faint marks, a mason's symbol, two intersecting lines like a forgotten equation. The Edwardians loved these details. They photographed them obsessively, tracing medieval initials like signatures from another world. One of those photographers, Lady Eleanor Haversham, once wrote that touching an old stone was like shaking hands with time. You understand what she meant. The surface is rough, cold, but alive with memory. In a corner of the ruin stands a makeshift bench, an Edwardian edition, carved with the date 1909. Someone has scratched a name beneath it. Alice R. Perhaps she sat here sketching the fallen arches, or waiting for someone who never came. The lichen has already started to claim her initials. Even the act of remembering, it seems, decays into beauty. The sun climbs higher and the ruins turn warm, honey-colored. A breeze stirs through the grass, carrying the faint scent of time and stone. You close your eyes and imagine the place in its prime, monks chanting, candles flickering, bread baking in the kitchen. Then another image overlays it, Edwardian picnickers laughing among the fallen stones, their parasols bright as butterflies. 2 centuries of life folded into one space. You half expect them to see each other, to wave across the veil of time. A sudden chill runs through the air. The wind shifts, and for a moment you swear you hear bells again. Not the church bells from earlier, but something deeper, older. You turn toward the sound, but there's nothing. Only the whisper of leaves through the broken window. Maybe it's just the acoustics. Or maybe, as the villagers say, the stones remember who built them. As you walk back toward the village, twilight begins to settle. The light catches on the old market cross once more, and it seems to glow faintly, the carvings alive in the dusk. A young couple stands before it, reading the inscription aloud. They laugh softly at the archaic words, then fall silent. You can tell they feel it too, the weight of years, the closeness of the past. When you finally return to the inn, the air smells of coal smoke and rain. The walls are thick, uneven, patched with plaster and pride. Above the fireplace hangs a framed photograph, the same abbey ruins you just visited but taken a century ago. The people in it, stiff-backed Edwardians in hats, stand exactly where you stood earlier. You can almost match the stones, one by one. You sit by the fire and let the warmth sink in. The conversation around you fades to a murmur. Somewhere outside, an owl calls. The innkeeper places a candle on your table, an old brass stick melted low. The flame flickers, reflecting in the window like a second moon. And as the light dances, you realize something comforting. The Edwardians built railways to escape the medieval, but their hearts kept circling back. Their architecture, their festivals, even their candlelight, all were ways of saying, "We remember." You lean back, eyelids heavy, the murmur of the fire filling your ears. Beyond the walls, the stones breathe quietly, keeping their own kind of watch. And in that stillness, you drift halfway between centuries, suspended in the gentle hum of history. Snow begins to fall before the clock even strikes 4. The light thins like watered milk, and the lamps across the Edwardian town blink awake one by one, faint, amber eyes peering through the gray veil of dusk. You can smell coal smoke curling through the damp air, feel that peculiar bite of winter, sharp but oddly welcoming, like an invitation to huddle closer, breathe slower. You draw your coat tight as you walk, boots sinking into the gathering white. Behind window panes, you glimpse the silhouettes of families moving through their evening rituals. One trimming a candle wick, another stirring a pot of soup, a child pressing her palms against frosted glass to trace the shape of a star. Winter in the Edwardian world wasn't just endured. It was acknowledged, even celebrated, an echo of older medieval instincts. You sense it in the way people spoke of the season, half in reverence, half in fear. Cold wasn't merely weather. It was presence, an entity that tested one's worth, sifted the hardy from the faint. And so they built customs around it, little acts of defiance and devotion meant to summon warmth and keep the dark politely at bay. The first whisper of winter came with the lantern vigils. Across villages and cities alike, groups of children paraded with paper lanterns shaped like stars, moons, or, in more ambitious cases, miniature castles. They wound through alleys, singing songs that mixed Edwardian rhyme with medieval melody. You can almost hear it now, soft, trembling voices against the wind. Light for the lost and fire for the found. Carry us home by candle bound. It's hauntingly pretty, the kind of tune you'd half remember in a dream. The lanterns glowed gold against the white snow, and townsfolk would toss coins or sweets into baskets as the children passed. Some said it began as a mimicry of the medieval boy bishops' processions. Others claimed it was older still, a faint pagan ember dressed up in Christian lace. Historians still argue whether these vigils were a revival of faith or simply an excuse to keep the streets alive during long, hungry months. But for you, trudging along that cobbled lane, none of that matters much. What stays with you is the light, those flickers cutting through fog like memory itself. The Edwardians, for all their modernity, loved that sense of continuity, of holding onto something old and glowing even as the world turned electric. And speaking of electric, by 1910, even small towns were beginning to adopt streetlights. Yet in winter, there was a curious resistance, a preference for oil lamps and candles during festivals. Electric light is too clean, one clergyman wrote, too heartless for worship. So for Christmas and Epiphany, communities dimmed the new bulbs and let the past breathe again. You imagine that contrast. Bright, humming lamps switched off while hundreds of hand-lit candles trembled in the nave of a church. Shadows danced on the arches like the ghosts of medieval masons. That's the beauty of Edwardian winter, its layers. Beneath the lace of snow lies centuries of tradition. The Yule log burned still, not as a necessity but a nod, a ritual gesture to the medieval hearth that once kept manor halls alive. Families would tell ghost stories while the log crackled, voices low, faces red from the heat. One of those tales might be about Old Winter's Bride, a half-forgotten folktale that lingered in rural corners. You'd hear it whispered by grandmothers, how the spirit of winter fell in love with a mortal girl who promised to light a candle every night until spring. One year she forgot and the frost came for her. Romantic, tragic, and utterly Edwardian, where even ghosts had good manners. Of course, not all winter customs were charming. There was also the beggar's brawl, a rowdy holdover from medieval misrule traditions. In industrial towns, groups of young men, often coal workers, would dress in tattered coats and masks, storming public houses to demand ale and song. The police frowned upon it, but most landlords played along. They'd pour a round, let the lads sing an old wassail tune, then chase them out into the snow. It was a living, breathing piece of medieval carnivalesque disorder, scrubbed up for the Edwardian age. And you, standing at the edge of one such scene, can almost feel the rhythm. The clatter of mugs, the wheeze of an accordion, the laughter spilling into the cold night air. For all its propriety, Edwardian England still had streaks of medieval mischief, bright and loud and gloriously human. But let's step away from the noise for a moment. Walk uphill toward the old churchyard. Snow muffles everything, your footsteps, your breath, even the distant whistle of the train. You reach the gate, iron cold under your fingers, and push it open. Inside, the graves look like sleeping children beneath white blankets. A lantern swings gently by the lich gate, its light wavering. This, too, is part of the winter tradition, the Watch of Souls. Edwardians believed that during the 12 days of Christmas, the veil between the living and the dead thinned. Families would visit graveyards not to mourn, but to share warmth. They'd light candles, leave wreaths, sometimes even whisper the year's gossip aloud. It sounds eerie, but the tone was tender, not fearful. You picture a young woman laying a posy on her mother's grave, whispering, "You'd have liked the dress I wore to the fair." The snow falls softly enough that her words feel safe. Historians still debate whether this was a Christianization of the older ancestor fires, the medieval practice of lighting hearths for the dead, or merely an Edwardian invention wrapped in nostalgia. Either way, the sentiment glows. There's comfort in imagining that those before us still listen, still care, still linger by lamplight. You keep walking past the church and into the town square, where preparations for the 12th night revel are already beginning. In medieval England, this was the grand reversal, lords serving peasants, jesters crowned mock kings. The Edwardians adored its theatricality, though they tamed it with gentility. Gone were the drunken brawls and ribald songs. In their place came costume balls, amateur plays, and candlelit banquets. You can see it unfold. Men in powdered wigs, women in Grecian gowns, laughter echoing through the frost. Somewhere a phonograph croons faintly, a modern ghost accompanying an ancient dance. And amid it all, that unmistakable blend of eras. The medieval hunger for warmth and community wrapped in Edwardian silk and etiquette. They weren't just reviving festivals, they were translating them, making the past comfortable enough to dream in. You lean against a lamppost, breath fogging the air, and realize how cyclical all of this feels. Every winter they rehearse the same quiet defiance against cold, against death, against forgetting. Lanterns, logs, vigils, songs, all glowing markers on humanity's long road through darkness. You look up and the stars seem closer tonight, clearer in the cold. The snow whispers across rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls, not ominous, just steady, reassuring. It reminds you of something a writer once said. Winter is not death, but sleep, and sleep is the rehearsal of memory. And so, as you drift through that Edwardian winterscape, past the lanterns, past the candles, past the echoes of medieval fires, you feel the rhythm slow, the noise fade. The world exhales. Snow gathers softly on your shoulders. You don't brush it off. You just let it settle. The snow melts, but the hush it left behind lingers like a ghost you can almost hear breathing. The lanterns of winter have dimmed, and now the air carries that curious mixture of thaw and expectation, mud and incense, damp stone and candle wax. You find yourself wandering toward the cathedral again. Its bell towers rise above the rooftops like the ribs of some enormous creature sleeping under slate. Inside, something stirs, a murmur of voices, the rustle of cloth, the faint scrape of a violin being tuned. Tonight is the masquerade of saints and shadows. If Edwardian winter belonged to the hearth, this season belongs to the stage. And what a strange stage it is, a sanctified one carved straight from the medieval calendar. You step through the nave, and at first glance it seems like any other church service. The pews polished, the altar glowing faintly. But then you see the masks. Children dressed as saints, faces half hidden behind painted papier-mâché, Saint George with a cardboard dragon's tail, Saint Agnes with a paper lamb, Saint Lucy carrying candles in her hair that drip real wax onto her shoulders. Their parents hover behind them, smiling nervously, unsure whether this is devotion or play. The Edwardians adored such pageants. They claimed to be reviving the medieval mystery plays, grand performances that once turned entire towns into theaters of salvation and sin. But what was once bawdy and raw became, in Edwardian hands, delicate and sentimental. You can almost sense the audience's polite applause where once there had been gasps and laughter. Still, beneath the refinement, something wild stirs. You catch it in the way the actors glance toward the dark corners of the church, as though expecting the real saints, or their shadows, to appear. Historians still argue whether these plays were truly religious or a form of Edwardian nostalgia dressed in prayer. The truth, you suspect, lies somewhere in between. A woman beside you whispers, "That's my son, he's Saint Sebastian." You nod politely, watching the boy in his white tunic raise a toy bow, his expression grave. The audience chuckles softly, and yet in the candlelight the arrows of tinsel and dowel glint like real silver. You can almost believe. When the performance ends, the audience files out slowly, their breath rising like incense in the chill air. But the evening isn't over. Outside, the masquerade of shadows begins, the secular twin of the saintly drama. You follow the crowd into the square, where gas lamps burn low and strings of paper lanterns sway between them like faded constellations. Masks everywhere, some painted in gold leaf, some nothing more than lace scraps tied with ribbon. The Edwardians loved their masquerades, relics of the Venetian carnivals, reborn with a distinctly British restraint. Beneath the masks, laughter hums like a secret language. You walk among them, your own breath clouding before you, the world feeling half real, half performed. Music floats from a small brass band under a striped awning, a waltz, slow and sweet. Couples turn in the snowmelt, boots scuffing the cobbles. Somewhere, a group of students dressed as monks sing bawdy verses to O Sanctissima, earning mock scolds from passing matrons. It's all so contradictory, sacred and profane, reverent and ridiculous. The Edwardians didn't erase the medieval world. They played with it, polished it, reimagined it for their sleepless, sentimental age. You feel that same duality as you stand there, the tug between holiness and hunger, the desire to belong to something older than reason. Someone presses a cup of mulled cider into your hand. The warmth seeps through your gloves. Around you, the masquerade deepens, a slow swirl of color and smoke. Masks of saints mingle with masks of jesters, bishops laugh with beggars, and you realize the entire town has become a living mosaic of its past selves. In one corner of the square stands a troupe performing the Dance of Fools, a reimagined medieval satire. They leap and twirl, pretending to stumble, their bells jingling in time with laughter. The leader, a woman in a jester's hood, points at you suddenly and cries, "Even the watcher must dance." You protest weakly, but the crowd cheers, and soon you find yourself pulled into the ring of dancers. The ground is slick, the air alive. You move clumsily, laughing as your boots skid on wet cobblestone. The jester grins, her face painted half black, half white, shadow and light. "There's the spirit," she whispers. "Saint or sinner, it doesn't matter, only that you move." And for a moment, you do. The band's tempo quickens. The masks blur. You can't tell who's who anymore, saint or fool, shadow or lantern flame. The medieval pulse still beats beneath the Edwardian sheen. Later, when the crowd disperses and silence falls over the square, you find yourself alone again. The discarded masks lie scattered like shed skins, their painted smiles half buried in slush. The church bells ring midnight, slow, solemn, echoing through the fog. You pick up one of the masks, its ribbon damp and frayed, and feel the weight of everything it represents. A century earlier, such masquerades were banned for moral impropriety. Centuries before that, they were acts of worship. Now, in the Edwardian twilight, they are something gentler, not rebellion, not faith, but memory made flesh. You slip the mask back onto the ground. The eyes stare upward, unblinking. Somewhere in the distance, a gramophone crackles to life. A soft soprano begins to sing, an old folk tune adapted for parlor rooms. Wear the mask of saints and shadows. Dance until the dark is through. Every face becomes another. Every dream belongs to you. You walk home beneath the weak moonlight, your breath ghosting ahead of you. The street lamps hum faintly, haloed by mist. Through curtained windows, you catch glimpses of families unmasking, laughing, dozing by the fire. The night feels both eternal and fleeting, as though you've stepped through the folds of history and back again without quite realizing. By the time you reach your door, the music has faded. You look once more toward the square, now empty, and can almost imagine a few lingering figures, saints, fools, lovers, fading into the mist. They don't wave, but you sense their approval. After all, you danced. That's all that was ever asked. Inside, you light a single candle. Its flame wavers as though uncertain which century it belongs to. The scent of melted wax fills the room, faintly sweet, faintly smoky. You think of the boy Saint Sebastian, the laughing jester, the masks discarded like dreams. It strikes you that the masquerade isn't over. It never truly ends. Every festival, every ritual, every attempt to rekindle the medieval spirit beneath Edwardian manners is its own dance between light and dark. And maybe that's the point. You set the candle down by the window where its glow spills faintly into the street. Outside, a thin snow begins again, light as dust, soft as silence. It catches the light and turns to silver before vanishing. You watch for a long time, not thinking, just feeling the quiet rhythm of the world returning to itself. When at last you turn away, the candle burns steadily, a small defiance against the night. And somewhere, faint but certain, you hear bells again. You wake to birdsong, that clean, liquid sound that arrives just before dawn, when the air is still blue with sleep. The frost hasn't melted yet, and your breath curls like smoke as you step outside. The garden lies before you in pale quiet. Trimmed boxwood hedges, tidy gravel walks, a sundial gone blind with moss. It's all so carefully arranged, so Edwardian in its devotion to symmetry and good taste. But as you stand there, you sense something else beneath the order, something older, wilder, and decidedly less obedient. They called him the Green Man. You've seen his face carved into the beams of parish churches and peering from the capitals of medieval cloisters. Leaves for hair, vines for veins, eyes half smiling as though he knows a secret you don't. To the Edwardians, he was a curiosity, part myth, part museum piece. But you can feel that to the earth itself, he's still something more. Every May, across towns and country estates, the Edwardians revived what they called the Pageant of the Green. It was half festival, half theatrical art project, inspired by medieval May games, yet dressed up in Edwardian civility. You imagine the scene. Villagers, students, and socialites alike gathering in fields dotted with buttercups, garlands slung over the arms of ladies in lace. At the center stands the Green Man, usually played by a local actor or gardener, painted head to toe in green dye, his crown made of oak leaves and ivy. He emerges from behind a wooden archway draped with ferns, symbolizing rebirth, growth, and the living link between humankind and nature. You watch him raise his staff, a branch of hawthorn polished smooth, and the crowd cheers. Then comes the May Queen, radiant in white silk, stepping through the grass like sunlight. Together they circle the maypole, ribbons flashing, drums thudding in a rhythm older than civilization itself. Historians still argue whether the Green Man was ever truly pagan or merely a Christian metaphor for resurrection. The Edwardians didn't much care. They loved him for his mystery, for the poetry of his presence, and perhaps, secretly, because he offered an escape from the choking etiquette of modern life. You can feel that same freedom in the air. The garden no longer looks tame, the hedges seem to breathe, the flowers lean toward you. A breeze stirs, shaking loose petals that swirl like small ghosts. In one hand, a man holds a phonograph, winding it carefully. The record begins to spin, releasing a tinny waltz that feels entirely at odds with the primal celebration around it. But that's the Edwardian way, old rituals stitched to new machinery, the ancient heartbeat set to modern rhythm. Children run barefoot through the grass, their laughter echoing through the mist. Someone shouts that the Jack in the Green has arrived, a living bush of holly and ivy walking on human legs. The crowd parts as he lumbers forward, heavy with greenery. The Green Man bows to him in mock reverence, and the audience applauds. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's history reborn for the sheer joy of remembering. And somewhere within that joy, you sense the medieval past winking knowingly. For centuries, the Green Man was the contradiction carved into England's stone, the pagan face hidden inside the Christian church, the forest spirit grinning from the rafters of order. Now, in the Edwardian era, he steps fully into the sunlight again, welcomed as art and allegory. As the festival continues, you wander toward the edge of the estate grounds where the trees grow thick. The air cools, smells faintly of loam and elderflower. Someone has hung ribbons on the branches, blue for luck, red for love, green for fertility. The colors flutter softly, whispering stories to the wind. You reach out to touch one and feel a strange hum beneath your fingertips, not magic exactly, but memory. You think of the medieval villagers who once tied offerings to the same kinds of trees, praying for a good harvest or a safe birth. The Edwardians, for all their skepticism, couldn't resist the pull of such gestures. They called it heritage. But you can hear the heartbeat in it, something more than nostalgia. You return to the main field just as the Morris men begin to dance. Their bells jingle, their handkerchiefs flash white against green. One of them, an older man with a beard full of pollen, winks at you. "We're keeping the world spinning, love," he says, "one step at a time." And maybe he's right. Because beneath all the laughter and pageantry lies a quiet faith, not in doctrine, but in continuity. The same rhythm that stirred medieval fields now hums through Edwardian lawns. You realize that festivals like this aren't performances so much as conversations between centuries, between humans and the land that holds them. Later that afternoon, as the sun slides lower, the pageant ends with a symbolic burial of winter. They carry out a wooden effigy, part snowman, part scarecrow, and set it gently in a bonfire. Flames leap, smoke curls into the golden sky. The crowd cheers, hats fly upward, and through the smoke you catch sight of the Green Man once more. He's watching quietly, the firelight flickering across his painted leaves. When the last ember dies, he turns away and disappears into the trees. You follow at a distance, drawn by curiosity, maybe by something older. The path winds through the orchard where apple blossoms are just beginning to open. You catch glimpses of green cloth between the trunks, then nothing. Only birdsong, only the whisper of the wind through petals. You stand there for a long moment, unsure whether you followed a man or a memory. Back at the estate, the festival grounds are being cleared. Paper plates, half-empty cups, a forgotten wreath of the detritus of celebration. But somehow the place feels blessed, like a cathedral without walls. An Edwardian scholar once wrote, "Every garden is a sermon in disguise." You wonder if that's true, if every clipped hedge hides a forest's ghost, if every polished marble nymph is a softened echo of the green man's grin. You walk back through the garden, noticing now how the vines climb the sundial, how ivy curls around the marble feet of a statue, how the air hums faintly with bees. The order of things doesn't seem so absolute anymore. And as you pause by the fountain, the surface of the water rippling with the reflection of clouds, you think you see something move beneath it just for a heartbeat. A face maybe, half leaf, half shadow, smiling up at you through the depths. You blink and it's gone. Only your own reflection remains, but softer, blurred by the wind. The birds resume their song. Somewhere faintly, you can still hear the echo of the festival drums, fading into memory. The green man has vanished into the trees again, as he always does, as he always will. But now you understand. The Edwardians didn't just revive the past, they learned to listen to it, to let its roots breathe beneath the surface of their polished lawns. You exhale, slow and content, feeling the same rhythm in your own chest. The world, it seems, is still very much alive. You wake to the low groan of a distant train, a sound that feels at once modern and ancient, like a dragon rolling in its sleep. The air smells faintly of coal smoke, rain, and morning bread. When you open your window, you see it there, a bridge rising out of the mist, its iron ribs catching the pale light. The Edwardians loved their bridges. They called them triumphs of progress, cathedrals of utility. But standing here, watching the fog wrap around those steel arcs, you realize they're also cathedrals of memory. Every rivet, every beam feels like a hymn to the builders who came before, the masons who carved Gothic vaults, the craftsmen who shaped abbey arches that still defy time. You walk toward the bridge, boots clinking against cobblestone. Beneath it, the river mutters softly to itself, carrying reeds and the occasional leaf like letters from an older world. The bridge looms above, part marvel, part monument. Its base is stone, quarried centuries ago for an abbey that no longer stands. The Edwardians were masters of reuse. When they built their railway bridges and civic halls, they often used blocks scavenged from medieval ruins. Practical, yes, but also poetic. The past became part of the present in the most literal way possible. Historians still argue whether this was reverence or robbery, but as your hand brushes the cold stone, you feel no theft in it, only continuity. The medieval masons carved this rock for prayer. Now it hums with the thunder of trains. The purpose changed, but the reverence remains. You cross to the midpoint, where the river opens like a silver ribbon below. The fog curls up around your knees, swallowing sound. For a moment, it feels like you're walking through time itself, suspended between centuries. Downstream, you can see the old stone bridge the railway replaced. It's narrow, crooked, and partially collapsed, its arches now home to moss and pigeons. But there's beauty in its ruin. Once, carts rolled across it, carrying grain to abbey mills. Once, monks crossed it barefoot, their chants echoing along the water. Now it's the ghost beside the living bridge, the whisper that gives the roar its meaning. You lean on the railing and imagine an Edwardian engineer standing in the same place 100 years ago, perhaps in a tweed coat, pipe smoke curling around his head, pride gleaming in his eyes. To him, this structure was the future, sleek, rational, unstoppable. But even he would have known he was building atop the bones of history. The blueprints of his bridges were descended from the geometry of cathedrals. The arches that carried his trains were the children of those that carried saints. There's something quietly poetic about that, progress as inheritance rather than rebellion. You start walking again, your footsteps echoing. Beneath the bridge, a barge glides by, its engine coughing softly. On deck, a woman in a shawl waves to you. You wave back. For her, the bridge is simply part of the landscape, reliable, ordinary. But to you, it's alive, humming with centuries of craftsmanship. You remember how Edwardians treated their infrastructure not as utility, but as art. The great railway stations, St. Pancras, York, Newcastle, were temples of glass and iron, their ceilings arched like the naves of medieval churches. The architects knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted awe. They wanted that same upward pull that once made pilgrims gasp beneath rose windows. Even street lamps, gaslit and later electric, were designed with Gothic finials and flourishes. The medieval aesthetic never truly died. It just slipped into new forms, riding the rails and glowing along boulevards. You pause by a plaque near the bridge's pillar. The inscription reads, "Built 1906 on the site of the old Priory Crossing. May those who pass remember those who paved the way." You smile. The Edwardians loved a good inscription, always a touch grand, always aware of posterity. As the train passes overhead, the entire bridge vibrates. The sound is immense, metal groaning, steam hissing, wheels screaming. But it doesn't feel violent. It feels like the voice of history clearing its throat. When the noise fades, you hear the gentle drip of water again, the sigh of the river reclaiming its quiet. Across the riverbank, the skyline glows faintly with chimneys and church spires. Both reach for heaven, one with smoke, the other with stone. The Edwardians didn't see a contradiction there. To them, progress and piety weren't enemies. They were siblings arguing over who got to touch the clouds first. You continue across, reaching the far side where the tracks vanish into a tunnel. The mouth of it is framed with carved limestone, decorated with ivy and grotesques, little stone creatures that grin at you from the shadows. A medieval flourish, tucked into an age of steel. You crouch and trace a finger over one of the carvings. It's a tiny stonemason holding a hammer, his expression oddly smug. Maybe the craftsman who carved him in 1906 or 1406 wanted to leave a signature, a joke for the future. You chuckle softly. As you climb the embankment, the view opens wide, the river gleaming below, the bridge stretching behind you like a spine of iron. In the distance, the outline of an old abbey ruin stands against the sky. Between them, the world looks layered, medieval shadow, Edwardian shine. A man walking his dog stops beside you. He tips his hat. "Old bridge still standing strong," he says. You nod. "Built to last," you reply. He smiles, "Aye, like faith, eh," and strolls away. His words linger longer than you expect. Like faith. Perhaps that's what these bridges really are, symbols of belief in endurance. Belief that the efforts of the living can honor the work of the dead. As twilight comes, the lamps along the bridge flicker on, one by one. Their glow spreads like a procession of votive candles. The mist thickens, turning the arches into silhouettes. You stand there, watching the lights stretch across the river like a string of prayers. Somewhere above, another train roars past, sparks flying from its wheels. It vanishes into the tunnel, swallowed by darkness. And for a heartbeat, the silence that follows feels sacred. The river keeps moving. The stones keep holding. The bridge hums with its quiet devotion, not to any god, but to the simple miracle of connection. You take one last look, tracing the outline of the arches with your eyes half stone, half steam, and then turn back toward town. Behind you, the bridge glows faintly through the fog. Ahead, The lamps of the Edwardian streets flicker like constellations. You realize both belong to the same sky. You keep walking, your footsteps echoing softly, the sound of one century shaking hands with another. You find yourself walking through the outskirts of an Edwardian town where the street lamps burn low and the cobbles glimmer faintly after a rain. The wind carries the faint perfume of damp earth and orchids. Ahead, behind wrought iron gates, you glimpse a glass house, vast, glimmering and faintly misted from within. The sign reads simply, "The Conservatory." It's long past midnight, yet the interior glows with soft amber light. Curiosity pulls you closer. The door yields with a sigh, and you step into a world half real, half dream. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of soil and the hush of growing things. Vines coil up iron columns, ferns bow under droplets of condensation. Somewhere, a clock ticks softly, its rhythm matching your pulse. You could almost be in a medieval cloister. The hush, the reverence, the architecture designed not just for beauty but for contemplation. The Edwardians built these glass houses as cathedrals of nature, and you feel it now, a kind of sacred calm under the ribs of glass and steel. Everywhere you look, the past breathes through the modern. The cast iron framework arches like a Gothic vault. The floor tiles gleam with heraldic patterns, lions and lilies, red and blue and gold. A marble fountain murmurs in the center, its basin carved with saints and vines. But instead of holy water, it spills over with water lilies, each pale petal catching the lamplight like a halo. You wander deeper. On a bench near the fountain lies a forgotten violin case, open as if waiting for its player to return. A few sheets of music rest beside it, curling at the edges. You glance down. The title reads Nocturne for Glass and Rain. It feels impossibly fitting. You imagine an Edwardian evening long ago, ladies in silk strolling beneath the palms, men in waistcoats discussing art and empire, the string quartet beginning softly as the gaslights hissed to life. They called such gatherings midnight conservatories, salons of sound and scent where culture itself became a performance of tranquility. Yet beneath their elegance, there lingered a medieval echo. The way the light filters through the glass recalls stained windows. The hush of conversation sounds like monastic chant. Even their entertainment, pageants, masks, and recitations drew from the rituals of an older world. You pause beside a fig tree and notice a carving at its base. Someone has etched words into the wood. To keep the green alive is to keep the spirit alive. That was the Edwardian creed, wasn't it? Amid the factories and the smoke, they sought to build sanctuaries of life, spaces where beauty, memory, and invention could coexist. Outside these walls, locomotives screamed and cities grew relentless. But here, under glass, they recreated Eden, or at least their idea of it. You trace your fingers along a fern frond, the cool moisture beating on your skin. The rhythm of water dripping from the ceiling creates a melody too delicate to name. In this moment, you could almost believe the plants are listening. Somewhere a gramophone begins to play, faintly at first, then swelling like a tide. The tune is slow, lilting, and strangely ancient. It sounds like a medieval ballad dressed in Edwardian lace, violins where lutes once were, cellos in place of harps. You follow the sound to the far end of the conservatory, where an old gardener tends to a bed of roses. His hands move with deliberate care, pruning, arranging, humming softly. When he sees you, he smiles, a tired, kind smile, as if he's seen visitors like you drift through his midnight garden before. Still blooming, even in October, he says, patting a rosebud. They know when someone's watching. You smile back, unsure whether he means the flowers or the ghosts of the Edwardians themselves. He gestures toward the ceiling, where the condensation has gathered in tiny constellations of droplets. These panes, he says, were cut by hand, each one slightly different, like souls. Then he returns to his work, and the silence grows rich again. You walk past him to a small side room where the glass curves into a dome. The space feels more chapel than greenhouse. Benches ring the edges. A small lectern stands in the center. On it, a book lies open, its pages illuminated in the style of a medieval manuscript, but the text is Edwardian. The title reads, "The Design of Peace, a Treatise on Beauty and Continuity," by Lady Eleanor Winthrop, 1909. You read a few lines, the ink faded but still graceful. In the tending of gardens, we do not only command nature, we converse with her. And in the building of glass houses, we do not enclose the wild, we invite it to speak. So let us keep alive the pattern of the ages. The faith of the cloister, reborn in the furnace of modern art. You close the book gently. Outside, thunder mutters in the distance, but here inside, everything feels untouched, preserved like amber. The Edwardians loved the medieval not only because it was beautiful, but because it offered moral symmetry. In their gardens, chapels, and music halls, they saw reflections of a world where craft mattered, where every leaf and line carried meaning. A vine curls around your wrist, tender, living. You let it go and turn toward the fountain again. The music has shifted. Now a piano joins in, its notes like falling rain. The whole conservatory seems to sway with the rhythm. You sit on a marble bench and close your eyes. The warmth, the scent, the sound, it all folds into you like a lullaby. You imagine how many Edwardians once sat here, finding solace from the noise of modernity. They might have spoken of Art Nouveau, of empire, of railways and reform. But beneath their talk, they sought something timeless, the peace that once lived behind monastery walls or beneath cathedral arches. Perhaps that's why so many of their homes included conservatories, tiny green worlds built to keep beauty alive through winter. In them, roses bloomed while snow fell outside, and the air smelled of perpetual spring. For them, progress was not about severing the past. It was about keeping the past in bloom. You open your eyes. The rain outside has begun in earnest, pattering on the roof in soft syncopation. The gardener is gone. The gramophone has stopped. Only the fountain continues to whisper. You stand, stretch, and begin to walk toward the door. The plants seem to part slightly as you pass, their leaves brushing against your coat like farewells. At the threshold, you turn back once more. The interior glows like a lantern in the storm, glass gleaming, vines trembling, light shifting like breath. It feels alive, as if the entire conservatory were dreaming. You step outside into the rain, the gates close behind you with a low creak. The path ahead glistens, leading back toward the Edwardian town, where chimney smoke and church bells mingle in the night air. The rain cools your face, grounding you again in the present, but part of you remains inside, among the ferns and roses, among the ghosts of gardeners and musicians who believed beauty could outlast time. You whisper softly, not sure to whom, to keep the green alive. And from the distance, carried faintly on the wind, the fountain seems to finish the phrase for you, is to keep the spirit alive. You leave the conservatory behind, the rain tapering off into mist as dawn begins to unfurl over the Edwardian skyline. The world smells of iron, wet stone, and awakening earth. Lamps flicker out one by one, leaving pale light to reclaim the streets. You move through the hush of early morning. Gaslight still glows faintly in the glass of shop fronts, and the puddles mirror the heavens. The empire is waking. You can feel it in the distant whistle of a train, the soft clop of hooves, the hum of unseen engines. But tonight, or perhaps this endless twilight you've wandered through, is not about empire as conquest. It's about the ember of something older, something still glowing even as the world turns steel gray and modern. The Edwardians thought they were living at the end of history. Their century was vanishing. The medieval and the mythical were slipping through their fingers, and so they lit lanterns, literally, figuratively, spiritually. They filled their streets with festivals, revived ancient fairs, built new cathedrals in old styles, all in defiance of the fatting dark. You walk toward the river. Across its slow surface, bridges gleam like strings of gold. Each lamp along the parapet burns within a glass globe patterned with ivy and fleur-de-lis, a subtle nod to the Middle Ages hidden in modern design. Beneath them, the water moves like molten pewter, carrying reflections of everything: the steeples, the arches, the promise of morning. An old man leans on the railing, lantern in hand. His coat is worn, his hat low over his brow. When he sees you, he nods, as if you're a fellow pilgrim returning from some long festival. "Last of the lanterns," he murmurs, holding it up. The flame inside trembles against the wind. "They used to light these along every street. Didn't matter if you were rich or poor, come winter, everyone carried a little fire home." You nod, and for a moment the centuries blur. You can almost see Edwardian children running ahead with their paper lanterns, their laughter skipping across the cobblestones. Behind them, shopkeepers hang garlands, brass bands tune up in the square. And above it all, that distinct Edwardian faith hums. That beauty, community, and ritual could hold the world together a little longer. The man smiles faintly. They thought the light would last forever, didn't realize they were already saying goodbye. He turns away, the glow of his lantern shrinking down the riverside path until it merges with the fog. You linger. The sky blushes faintly with sunrise, lavender, and rose. A church bell tolls the hour. Its sound echoes across the rooftops, reverberating against stone walls built in styles that would have been familiar to monks centuries earlier. Even the architecture carries that dialogue between eras. Gothic spires reaching through industrial haze, red brick factories patterned with pointed arches, railway stations crowned with rose windows. Edwardian Britain was, in many ways, a medieval dream reimagined through glass and gaslight. Its builders did not want to abandon the past. They wanted to live inside it, to walk streets that felt eternal. Historians still argue whether this nostalgia was a retreat or a kind of resistance. Did the Edwardians cling to medieval beauty because they feared modernity, or because they understood that without memory, progress becomes hollow? Either way, their world glowed with a kind of twilight wisdom. They built with reverence, celebrated with theater, mourned with pageantry. Even their funerals were spectacles of tradition, with black-plumed horses and silver lanterns leading the way, echoes of medieval processions once meant to guide souls toward the light. You cross the bridge slowly. On the far side, the market square stretches before you, empty now, though faint traces of last night's festival remain. Confetti caught in the drains, the smell of wax and cider, a single ribbon clinging to a lamppost. The silence hums with memory. At the center stands a monument, a tall stone column crowned with a figure holding a lamp aloft. You've seen it before, perhaps in a dream or in some forgotten painting. The plaque at its base reads, "To the keepers of light, may the flame endure." You reach out, brushing the cool stone. The inscription feels both memorial and promise. Around the base, small niches hold the remnants of candles melted, spent, yet unmistakably human. Nearby, a shop door opens and a woman steps out, sweeping her threshold. She glances at you, then at the statue. "We used to relight them every winter," she says softly. "Now the council doesn't bother. Too much trouble, they say." Her broom pauses. "But I keep one burning at home. My gran did too, said it keeps the old year watching." You thank her, and she smiles, tired but genuine, before returning inside. The wind shifts. You hear the faint strain of music somewhere, a street organ perhaps, or a record playing behind a shuttered window. The tune is unmistakably medieval, a simple melody woven into a waltz. You follow it down a narrow lane where ivy climbs the walls and cobbles echo underfoot. The houses lean toward each other like conspirators of memory. At the end of the lane, you find a small courtyard lit by a single lantern. Beneath it, a circle of people stands, not many, maybe a dozen gathered around a brazier. They're passing mugs of tea, chatting quietly, some in overcoats, some in pajamas, as if drawn out of their homes by instinct. A woman notices you. "Come to see the last lighting?" she asks. You nod, stepping closer. She explains that every year on this date, the town relights one lantern in memory of all the old Edwardian festivals, the fairs, the May processions, the Christmas vigils, even the midsummer bonfires. "Just one light," she says, "so we don't forget what warmth feels like." Someone strikes a match. The sound is sharp in the cold air. The flame flares, then steadies within the lantern's glass. For a moment, everyone falls silent. The firelight trembles on their faces, young and old, weary and curious. In their eyes, you glimpse centuries overlapping. The medieval peasants who danced in torchlight fields, the Edwardians who paraded under gas lamps, the modern watchers holding smartphones, their screens reflecting the same fragile glow. You realize the light was never about nostalgia. It was about connection, the small, stubborn act of keeping the dark at bay together. The flame flickers higher. Someone begins to hum an old tune, and soon others join in. It's wordless but familiar, a melody that might have drifted from a 13th century abbey or a 1905 music hall. It doesn't matter which. It lives, and that's enough. The sky brightens. Birds stir. The lantern's glow pales before the sunrise, but no one moves to snuff it out. You take one last look before turning away. The Edwardian world around you, its towers, gardens, cobbles, and glass, seems to shimmer at the edge of vision, like an afterimage of light on water. For a fleeting moment, you think you hear voices. Laughter from a bygone festival, the ring of a distant bell, the whisper of silk and steel. Then they fade, leaving only the wind and the warmth of memory. You walk back toward the river as the first true rays of sun break across the horizon. They catch the last lantern still burning on the bridge, a fragile point of gold against the morning blue. It flares once, bright as a star, before melting into daylight. And just like that, the Edwardian night ends, not with a silence but with a soft exhale. You realize, as your steps slow and your breathing steadies, that you've been tracing the same rhythm the Edwardians once followed. The ancient pulse of festival and quiet, of loss and renewal. The flame may fade, but the warmth lingers. Now, the lights of the story dim with the dawn. You've walked through centuries tonight, through music, gardens, lanterns, laughter, and rain. And though the streets of the Edwardians are gone, their warmth endures in the little rituals we still keep. Lighting a candle, keeping a plant alive through winter, humming an old tune when the night feels heavy. So let your breathing slow. Imagine you're back beneath those glass arches of the midnight conservatory. Hear the faint trickle of the fountain, the creak of iron cooling as the last lantern fades. The air smells faintly of roses and rain. Each sound grows softer. The city withdraws, replaced by a hush so deep it feels like the earth itself is listening. You've traveled far enough for one night. The ghosts of the Edwardians can rest, their festivals still flickering somewhere behind your eyelids. Their world was never truly lost. It just waits quietly in the spaces between memory and sleep. Now let the last echoes of music dissolve into silence. The flame has done its work. It's time to let it rest. Close your eyes. The warmth lingers. Sweet dreams, traveler of time.